When my only daughter looked me straight in the eyes and told me I should hurry up and die so she could have my lottery winnings, I felt something inside me snap like a dry twig in winter. 3 days later, I was signing papers that would lock away every penny from her greedy hands. That's when I realized money doesn't just reveal who people are, it peels back their skin to show the monster that was always hiding underneath. If you're watching this, subscribe now and tell me in the comments if someone you loved ever showed their true colors when money entered the picture. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. At 65, I thought I knew what the rest of my life would look like. Small, quiet, and forgotten, like a book pushed to the back of a shelf nobody bothers to dust anymore. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and for 10 years, I lived in the same two-bedroom house in Oak Ridge, a neighborhood that used to be nice back when the mill was still running. Now it's just old people like me, watching property values sink like stones in a murky pond. My husband, Frank, died 12 years ago. Heart attack while fixing the garage door. 1 minute, he was complaining about the rusty spring. The next minute, he was gone. We'd been married 37 years, and suddenly, I was alone. But losing Frank wasn't the worst pain I'd ever felt. That came 2 years later, when my only child, my daughter Melissa, walked out of my life. She'd always been difficult. Even as a child, Melissa had a way of looking at things like she deserved more. Frank called it ambition. I called it trouble. She married young, 22, to a man named Richard Cantwell, who worked in finance. The kind of finance that required golf memberships and tailored suits, but never seemed to involve actual work. The last time I saw Melissa was at my 65th birthday. Frank had been gone 8 years by then. She brought Richard and their 2 children, my grandchildren, Sophie and Ethan, who barely knew me. They arrived an hour late, stayed 40 minutes, and left before I cut the small cake I'd baked myself. That evening, Melissa asked me for a loan, $20,000 for an investment opportunity. When I told her I didn't have that kind of money, that Frank's pension barely covered my mortgage and medications, she exploded. "This is exactly why Dad should have left everything to me instead of you," she spat. "You've done nothing with your life. Nothing. And now you can't even help your own daughter when she needs it." I remember how her words felt like slaps. How Richard stood in my doorway, jingling his car keys, looking annoyed that this was taking so long. How my grandchildren stared at the floor, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "I would if I could." Melissa's face turned to stone. "Well, Mom, when you're eating cat food in your 80s, don't come crawling to us." That was the last thing my daughter ever said to me. She walked out, taking my grandchildren with her. No calls. No cards. Not even a text message on Christmas. 10 years of silence. Until the lottery.
It was a stupid impulse buy.
$5 spent at Harvey's gas station when I went to pick up my blood pressure medication. The cashier, a young woman with pink hair named Denise, talked me into it. "Powerball's up to 300 million, Mrs. M. $5 could change your life." I never bought lottery tickets. Frank always called them a tax on people who can't do math. But that day, something made me hand over that $5 bill. Maybe it was the way Denise smiled at me, like she still believed in miracles. Maybe it was just that I was tired of counting pennies. I stuffed the ticket into my purse and forgot about it until 3 days later, when Denise called me at home. "Mrs. Mitchell? It's Denise from Harvey's. You need to check your ticket." The winning numbers came from our store. My hands trembled so badly, I could barely hold the ticket while she read the numbers over the phone. Each one matched. 6 numbers that changed everything. After taxes, my winnings came to just over $100 million. 100 million. A number so large my mind couldn't wrap around it. The first few days were a blur. The lottery commission sent people to my house. Lawyers appeared with papers to sign. Reporters camped on my lawn. My phone, silent for years, suddenly rang constantly with calls from financial advisors and distant relatives I'd never even heard of. I felt like I was drowning in attention after years of invisibility. It was jarring and terrifying. But the real shock came on the 5th day after my win was announced. It was nearly dusk when the sleek black Mercedes pulled into my cracked driveway. I was sitting by the window, as I often did in the evenings, watching the neighborhood children play. The car door opened, and I saw a flash of red-soled heels hit my concrete. Then Melissa stepped out, looking like a stranger. 10 years had changed her. Her blonde hair was shorter, styled in an expensive-looking cut that framed a face that had somehow hardened and softened in all the wrong places. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly income and diamonds that glittered at her ears and throat. But it was her eyes that struck me most, cold and calculating, scanning my humble house like she was already measuring it for demolition. My heart stuttered in my chest. My daughter, my only child, standing on my doorstep after a decade of silence. For one foolish moment, hope flared inside me. Maybe she'd seen the news and worried about me. Maybe she'd come to reconcile, to introduce me properly to my grandchildren, to make amends. That hope died the moment she opened her mouth. "Hello, Mother," she said, not bothering to wait for an invitation before brushing past me into the house. She looked around with barely disguised disgust. "Still haven't updated anything, I see." I stood frozen in my own entryway, suddenly conscious of the worn carpet, the faded wallpaper, the outdated furniture that had been new when Melissa was in high school. "It's been 10 years, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She waved her hand dismissively. "Let's not do the whole dramatic reunion thing. We both know why I'm here." And there it was. The truth, laid bare without even the courtesy of pretense. "The money," I said flatly. Melissa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course the money. $100 million in the hands of a 65-year-old widow who doesn't know the difference between a stock and a bond? It's irresponsible." I felt my spine stiffen. "I may be old, Melissa, but I'm not stupid." She laughed, a brittle sound that held no warmth. "Mom, be realistic. You've never managed more than Dad's pension. You still clip coupons, for God's sake. This kind of money needs proper management." "And you think you should manage it?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. Melissa walked to my living room window, staring out at the neighborhood like a queen surveying a disappointing kingdom. "I'm thinking of your best interests. Transfer the bulk of it to me. I'll make sure you're taken care of, a nice retirement community, a monthly allowance, whatever you need." My throat tightened. "And the rest?" She turned back to me, her smile now predatory. "The rest will be invested properly. For the future. For Sophie and Ethan's education. For security." I sank into my old armchair, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. "You haven't spoken to me in a decade, Melissa. You didn't even call when I had pneumonia 2 winters ago. Mrs. Abernathy from next door had to drive me to the hospital." Something flickered across her face, not guilt, but annoyance. "That's ancient history."
We're talking about now.
"About being practical." "Practical," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Melissa sighed dramatically, checking the expensive watch on her wrist. "Look, I don't have all day. Richard is waiting in the car with the kids. I brought the paperwork. All you need to do is sign." "Paperwork? You already have paperwork." She pulled a thick envelope from her designer handbag. My lawyer drew it up. "It's a simple transfer of assets. You keep $5 million, more than enough for someone your age, and the rest comes to me for proper management." I stared at her, this stranger wearing my daughter's face. "And if I refuse?" That's when she said it. The words that changed everything between us forever. "Don't be difficult, Mom. You're too old to handle this kind of money. Transfer it to me." Her voice hardened. "You'll die soon anyway." The room seemed to tilt around me.
"You'll die soon anyway."
5 words that stripped away any illusion that my daughter cared about me as anything more than a walking ATM. I should have been crushed. I should have crumbled under the weight of such casual cruelty from my own child. But something else happened instead. Something strange and powerful and unexpected. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that comes when you finally see something clearly after years of fog. When you realize that the pain you've been carrying has a purpose after all. "What are you smiling about?" Melissa demanded, her confidence faltering for the first time. "Nothing," I said quietly. just thinking about how predictable people can be. She thrust the envelope toward me. Just sign the papers, Mom. Don't make this difficult. I took the envelope, but didn't open it. I need time to think. Melissa's face darkened. There's nothing to think about. This is what's best. For whom? I asked. For everyone, she snapped. God, you're still so stubborn. This is why Dad was always frustrated with you. The mention of Frank, my Frank, who had loved me through 37 years of marriage, in her mouth felt like desecration. But I kept my face calm. 3 days, I said. Give me 3 days to review these with my own lawyer. You don't have a lawyer, she scoffed. I do now, I replied. The Lottery Commission provided one. This wasn't entirely true. They had given me a list of recommended attorneys, but I hadn't called any of them yet. Now I knew I would. First thing tomorrow. Melissa looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her.
Fine.
3 days. But don't get any crazy ideas, Mother. This money would be wasted on you. With that parting shot, she turned and walked out, her expensive heels clicking on my worn linoleum. Through the window, I watched her slide back into the Mercedes. I caught a glimpse of Richard behind the wheel, and in the back seat, 2 faces I barely recognized, my grandchildren, teenagers now, absorbed in their phones, uninterested in the grandmother they'd been taught to forget. As the car pulled away, I clutched the envelope of papers to my chest and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: rage.
Pure, clarifying rage.
That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that grew cold, thinking about my life, about Frank, about the daughter we had raised who could look me in the eye and tell me to hurry up and die. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The Lottery Commission had given me a contact, a financial advisor named Marcus Powell who specialized in helping winners navigate their sudden wealth. I called him at 7:30 a.m., afraid he wouldn't answer, but he picked up on the second ring. Mrs. Mitchell, he said warmly, I was hoping to hear from you. How are you holding up? My estranged daughter showed up at my door yesterday with transfer papers, I said, skipping the pleasantries. She wants me to sign over 95% of my winnings to her. There was a pause, then a soft whistle. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon. Family comes out of the woodwork when money appears. She's not woodwork, I said, my voice cracking. She's my daughter, my only child, and she told me I should hurry up and die so she could have the money. Marcus's voice hardened. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to connect you with someone right away. Her name is Diana Levinson. She's not just a lawyer. She specializes in protecting lottery winners from exactly this kind of situation. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a sleek downtown office across from Diana Levinson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with salt and pepper haircut in a no-nonsense style. She read through Melissa's papers, her frown deepening with each page. This is outrageous, she said finally, slapping the documents down on her desk. This isn't a transfer agreement. It's a complete surrender of your rights. If you sign this, your daughter would have control over every penny, including the $5 million supposedly left for you. I wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed still stung. What should I do? Diana leaned forward, her eyes intense. Mrs. Mitchell, you need to understand something. This money is yours. Not your daughter's, not your family's, yours. You bought the ticket. You won. You get to decide what happens to every last cent. But I'm 65, I said, echoing Melissa's concern despite myself. I don't know how to manage this kind of money. That's what professionals like me are for, Diana said firmly. And 65 isn't ancient. You could live another 30 years. This money needs to last, and it needs to be protected from others and, frankly, from potential mistakes you might make while you're still adjusting to wealth. I nodded, feeling both relieved and overwhelmed. So, what do we do? What happened next was a whirlwind of activity. Diana assembled a team: financial advisors, estate planners, security consultants. They explained options I never knew existed: trusts, foundations, investments, protections. They asked questions about my values, my wishes, my goals. And for the first time in years, someone was listening to what I wanted. I need security, I told them. I need to know I'll never worry about money again. That was easy, they assured me. With proper management, I could live in luxury for the rest of my life on just a fraction of my winnings. I want to help others, I continued, thinking of Mrs. Abernathy who had driven me to the hospital, of Denise with her pink hair who had sold me the winning ticket. People like me, older, alone, struggling. Diana smiled. We can set up a foundation. You can direct exactly where the money goes. And my daughter? I asked, the pain still fresh. What about her? Here, Diana's expression grew serious. That's entirely up to you, Mrs. Mitchell. You can cut her off completely. You can give her a settlement. You can create a trust with conditions. The choice is yours. The choice is yours. For simple words that gave me back my power. For the next 2 days, I worked with Diana and her team, making decisions, signing papers, real papers, not the trap Melissa had tried to set for me. We created an unbreakable structure for my new wealth. 40 million went into a series of investments and annuities that would provide me with more monthly income than I had ever imagined, guaranteed for the rest of my life. 50 million was placed in a charitable foundation called the Eleanor Mitchell Second Chance Fund. It would support housing for elderly people facing homelessness, medical care for those who couldn't afford it, and education for late-in-life career changes. And the remaining 10 million? That was my masterstroke. We placed it in a special trust with very specific conditions. It was earmarked for family inheritance, but accessing it would require proof of genuine care and connection, regular visits, real relationship, actual support. Not just showing up when money was involved, but being there consistently, through good times and bad. In short, Melissa would have to be a daughter again, a real daughter, if she wanted to see a penny. By the time Melissa's Mercedes pulled into my driveway 3 days later, everything was locked in place. The papers were signed. The transfers were complete. The money was protected. She didn't come alone this time. Richard came too, striding into my house like he already owned it, his handsome face creased with impatience. They didn't bring my grandchildren. Have you had enough time to review the paperwork? Melissa asked, not bothering with a greeting. She was dressed even more expensively than before, as if trying to intimidate me with her success. I have, I said calmly. Richard smiled thinly. Excellent. We've got the final versions right here. Our lawyer made a few small adjustments. I bet he did, I thought. Actually, I said, I won't be signing your papers. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What do you mean? Melissa's voice was dangerously quiet. I mean, I've made other arrangements for my winnings. The money has already been transferred. Richard stepped forward, his face flushing. Transferred? Transferred where? To secure trusts and a charitable foundation, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's all been legally settled. Melissa's face contorted with rage. You can't do that. That's our money. No, I corrected gently. It was my money, my ticket, my win. You stupid old woman. Richard exploded. Do you have any idea what you've done? That money was meant for your family. My family? I repeated, looking directly at Melissa. I haven't had a family for 10 years. Not since my daughter decided I wasn't worth her time anymore. Melissa's face went white, then red. That's not fair. You know we've been busy. Too busy for a phone call? Too busy for a Christmas card? Too busy to visit when I was hospitalized with pneumonia? My voice remained calm, but I could feel years of hurt powering each word. This isn't about ancient history, Richard snapped. This is about you making a foolish decision without consulting the people who know better. I turned my gaze to him, this man who had helped turn my daughter against me. The decision is made, Richard. The money is gone. Gone where? Melissa's voice rose to a shriek. What have you done with it? I walked to the side table where I'd placed a folder, one prepared by Diana with a simple summary of my financial arrangements. I handed it to Melissa. See for yourself. Her hands shaking with fury, Melissa ripped open the folder and began reading, Richard looking over her shoulder. I watched their faces change as they absorbed what I had done. The blood drained from Melissa's cheeks. Richard's jaw clenched so hard I could see a muscle jumping in his temple. You gave away $50 million to strangers? Melissa whispered, horrified. Not strangers, I corrected. People who need help. People like me before I won. And this family trust. Richard stabbed at the paper with his finger. What kind of sick game is this?
Not a game, I said.
An opportunity. The money is there for family who acts like family, who visits regularly, who shows care and concern, who is present. Melissa threw the papers to the floor. This is elder abuse. You've been manipulated by lawyers looking to cash in. We'll fight this in court. We'll have you declared incompetent. I had expected this. Diana had warned me it might happen, but I was prepared. You're welcome to try, I said, reaching for another folder on the table. But before you do, you should know that every meeting I've had with my legal team has been videotaped, with psychological evaluations confirming my competence. The judge who reviews lottery winners' arrangements has already approved everything. It's ironclad. Richard grabbed Melissa's arm. We're leaving. We'll be back with our lawyers. But as they turned to go, the doorbell rang. I checked my watch right on time. That would be the security team, I said. Part of my new arrangements. They'll be keeping an eye on the house from now on. I opened the door to find two serious-looking men in suits. They nodded respectfully to me. Everything all right, Mrs. Mitchell? The taller one asked, his eyes flicking to Melissa and Richard. Just fine. Thank you, I said. My daughter and son-in-law were just leaving. The message was clear. The power dynamic had shifted. Permanently. Melissa looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. I saw confusion in her eyes, and something else. Fear. She wasn't used to me standing my ground. This isn't over, she hissed as she brushed past me. Actually it is, I replied softly. Unless you want it to be a beginning instead. She didn't answer. She just stormed out to the waiting Mercedes, Richard trailing behind her like a thundercloud. As the car roared away, I felt a curious lightness, as if a burden I'd carried for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. But I wasn't naive. I knew this was just the first skirmish in what would likely be a long war. Melissa and Richard wouldn't give up easily, not with millions at stake. They would look for loopholes, weaknesses, any way to get their hands on what they believed should be theirs. What they didn't know was that I was no longer the easy target they remembered. I had resources now, not just money, but people on my side. Professionals who knew how to protect me and my wishes. More importantly, I had found my strength again. The strength that had gotten me through losing Frank. The strength that had kept me going through a decade of loneliness. The strength that my daughter had mistaken for weakness. As I closed the door on the retreating Mercedes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not fear, not dread, but a curious excitement about what might come next. Because for the first time in a very long time, I was writing my own story. What I didn't know then was just how dark and twisted that story would become. Or that Melissa's parting words, "This isn't over," would prove to be the understatement of my life. I had no idea what she was capable of. I would learn soon enough. That night, as I sat by my window watching the security team patrol my property, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Mitchell?" a young voice said when I answered. "It's Sophie, your granddaughter." My heart leaped into my throat. "Sophie? Is everything all right?" There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "Mom doesn't know I'm calling you. She took my phone, but I'm using my friend's." "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, sudden fear gripping me. "Grandma, I heard Mom and Dad talking. They're planning something. Something bad." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I think you need to be careful." Before I could ask what she meant, the line went dead. I sat in the darkening room, the phone still clutched in my hand, as a cold realization settled over me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about survival. I barely slept that night. Sophie's warning echoed in my mind like a siren. What were Melissa and Richard planning? How far would they go? I'd seen the rage in their eyes when they realized I'd outmaneuvered them. People do desperate things when millions of dollars slip through their fingers. At dawn, I called Diana. They're not going to just walk away, I told her, my voice tight with worry. My granddaughter called. She overheard them planning something. Diana's response was immediate and practical. We need to document everything. Every call, every visit, every threat, veiled or direct. And we need to increase your security. By noon, my modest home had been transformed. Security cameras at every entrance. New locks. A panic button system. 2 guards rotating shifts outside. It felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life. Is all this really necessary? I asked the security chief, a former police officer named Victor. He gave me a level look. Mrs. Mitchell, in my 20 years of experience, I've learned that money changes people. And not usually for the better. The next morning brought proof of his wisdom. I was in the kitchen making tea when my phone rang. It was Teresa Abernathy from next door, the same neighbor who had driven me to the hospital when I had pneumonia. Eleanor, she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I thought you should know. There's a man going door to door in the neighborhood asking questions about you. My hand tightened around the phone. What kind of questions? Strange ones. About your health. Whether you seem confused lately. If anyone's seen you drinking or taking pills. He's telling people he's worried about your mental state. I slid down my spine. Did he say who he was? He claimed to be from Adult Protective Services, but he didn't leave a card. And Eleanor, I saw him get into a car with your son-in-law afterward. Richard. Of course. They were laying groundwork to challenge my competency. To suggest I wasn't in my right mind when I made my financial arrangements. I thanked Teresa and immediately called Diana again. She wasn't surprised. It's a common tactic, she said grimly. But we prepared for this, remember? We have the videotaped meetings, the psychological evaluations. Still, we should countermove. I'm sending a private investigator to your neighborhood today to talk to everyone this man spoke to. We need witness statements. This was becoming a chess match, with my life and fortune as the prize. I had never been much of a chess player, but I was learning quickly. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Victor checked the security camera and frowned. It's a woman claiming to be from the county health department. Says there's been reports of black mold in homes on the street. I peered at the monitor. The woman was young, professionally dressed, holding a clipboard and wearing an official-looking badge. But something felt off. Call the health department, I instructed. Verify she's legitimate before letting her in. 20 minutes later, we had our answer. The health department had no one in our area and no reports of black mold. The woman, confronted by Victor, fled to a waiting car, the same car Teresa had described. They were getting bolder, and I was getting scared. 3 days passed without incident. I started to hope that perhaps Melissa and Richard had given up, realizing the legal protections around my decisions were too strong to break. I should have known better. It was Sunday morning. I was sitting in my living room, enjoying the simple pleasure of reading a book without worrying about bills for the first time in decades. The security team had rotated shifts, and my house was quiet. The phone rang, my landline this time, not my cell. The caller ID showed St. Mary's Hospital. Mrs. Mitchell? A professional voice asked when I answered. This is Dr. Harrison from the emergency room. I'm calling about your granddaughter, Sophie Cantwell. My heart stuttered. Sophie? What's happened? She's been in a car accident. Nothing life-threatening, but she's asking for you. She seems quite distressed. Without thinking, I grabbed my purse and coat. I'll be right there. I was halfway to the door when something stopped me. A small, nagging doubt. Why would Sophie ask for me? She barely knew me. And how did the hospital know to call my landline, not Melissa's phone? I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned back to the phone. May I speak with Sophie, please? I asked. There was a pause. She's in with the radiologist right now, getting x-rays. What's the nature of her injuries? Another hesitation. I'm not at liberty to discuss that over the phone due to privacy laws. That made sense, but my unease grew. Which St. Mary's location is she at? The main campus, of course, the voice replied smoothly. Too smoothly. Because there was no main campus of St. Mary's. There was only one location in our city. My blood ran cold. "I'll call you right back," I said and hung up. With shaking fingers, I dialed the Real St. Mary's Hospital. When the operator answered, I asked to be connected to the emergency room. "I'm calling about a patient," I said. "Sophie Cantwell. She was brought in after a car accident." "One moment, please," the nurse said. I heard keyboard clicks then. "I'm sorry, but we don't have any patient by that name." Relief flooded me, quickly followed by rage. It had been a trap. If I had rushed out, who knows what would have been waiting for me. At the very least, they could have claimed I was disoriented, driving frantically to a hospital for a non-existent emergency. I called Victor, who came immediately. He was furious when I explained what had happened. "This is criminal," he growled. "Impersonating medical personnel is a felony." "Can we prove it was them?" I asked. "We'll try," he said, already making calls to trace the number that had appeared on my caller ID. But we both knew it would lead nowhere. Richard was too smart to leave an obvious trail. That night, as I tried to fall asleep in my increasingly fortress-like home, my cell phone pinged with a text message. "Unknown number. Grandma, it's Ethan. Are you okay? Mom and Dad are acting weird. Sophie told me she called you." I stared at the message, heart pounding. Was it really my grandson? Or another trap? I typed back cautiously. "I'm fine. How are you and your sister?" The response came quickly, scared. "Dad lost it when they came back from your house. Never seen him like that. He broke stuff." This felt genuine, the awkward phrasing of a teenage boy trying to express something frightening. Still, I needed to be careful. "Can you call me?" I texted. "I'd like to hear your voice." No response. 5 minutes passed. 10. Just as I was about to give up, my phone rang. "Grandma?" The voice was young, uncertain. A voice I barely recognized because the last time I'd heard it, it belonged to a child, not the teenager Ethan had become. "Ethan," I breathed. "Is it really you?"
"Yeah."
A pause. "This is weird. I barely remember you." The simple honesty of that statement brought tears to my eyes. "I know. It's been a long time. Sophie said you want a ton of money and Mom and Dad are freaking out because you won't give it to them." I closed my eyes. "It's complicated, Ethan. Dad keeps saying you're going crazy. That you're giving all your money to strangers to spite them. Are you?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm giving some of it to help people who need it. And I'm keeping some for myself. And some is for family. Real family." He was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean? Real family? How do you explain a decade of abandonment to a child? How do you tell him that his parents used him as a pawn in a game of emotional cruelty?" "It means people who care about each other," I said carefully. "Who are there for each other. Not just when there's money involved." "Like visiting and stuff?"
"Yes."
"Like visiting and calling and remembering birthdays." Another long pause. "Mom said you didn't want us around, that you told her to keep us away." The lie hit me like a physical blow. "Ethan, that's not true. I've missed you and Sophie every day for 10 years. I would have given anything to be part of your lives." "Then why?" His voice cut off abruptly. I heard muffled sounds, a distant shout. "Ethan?" I called. "Ethan, are you there?" But the line had gone dead. And when I tried to call back, the phone had been turned off. That night, I sat in my dark kitchen until dawn, holding my phone, praying for it to ring again. It didn't. But as the first gray light of morning seeped through my windows, I made a decision. If Melissa and Richard wanted a war, I would give them one. But I would fight it my way. Diana looked skeptical when I laid out my plan the next day. "It's risky," she said, tapping her pen against her legal pad. "Confronting them directly could escalate the situation." "They're already escalating," I pointed out. "Sending imposters to my home. Trying to lure me out with fake emergencies. Poisoning my grandchildren against me. I'm tired of being on the defensive." Marcus, my financial advisor, who had joined us for this meeting, leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Mitchell?" I want to meet them on neutral ground, with witnesses. I want to lay everything out in the open, the truth about the past 10 years, about their abandonment, about their lies to my grandchildren. And I want to make them an offer. What kind of offer? Diana asked warily. A simple one. Stop the attacks. Stop the schemes. Behave like actual family, regular visits, real relationships, and they can access the family trust one set up. $10 million, just as I originally arranged. But if they continue down this path, I'll revoke even that possibility. Marcus and Diana exchanged glances. It could work, Marcus said slowly, if they're rational. That's a big if, Diana countered. People this fixated on money rarely respond rationally when it's dangled in front of them. I have to try, I insisted. Not just for me, but for Sophie and Ethan. They deserve to know the truth. In the end, they agreed to help me set it up. Diana would arrange a meeting at her office, neutral ground with security and witnesses. Marcus would prepare clear documentation of the family trust and its conditions. And I would prepare to face my daughter and tell her truths I had held back for far too long. The meeting was set for Friday at 2 p.m. Diana's assistant called Melissa directly, framing it as a settlement discussion regarding the lottery winnings. To my surprise, Melissa agreed immediately. Too immediately, as it turned out. Friday morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Victor, his voice tight with urgency. Mrs. Mitchell, there's something you need to see. Turn on Channel 7 News.
Now.
Fumbling with the remote, I switched on my small television and felt my heart stop. There on the screen was my daughter, perfectly coiffed and tearfully explaining to a sympathetic reporter how her elderly mother had won the lottery and was being manipulated by unscrupulous lawyers and advisors into giving away her fortune. She's not well, Melissa said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She's always been a bit unstable. My husband and I are just trying to protect her from people taking advantage of her condition. And what condition is that? The reporter asked, microphone extended. Melissa looked directly into the camera, her eyes brimming with fake concern. The doctors are still evaluating, but early signs point to dementia. She's been acting erratically, making wild accusations, giving away millions to strangers while cutting off her own family. I watched in horror as the segment continued. They had footage of my modest house, described as where the lottery winner still lives in concerning conditions. They interviewed a neighbor I had never seen before who claimed I wandered the streets at night confused. And then, most shocking of all, they showed a brief clip of Richard, identified as a financial expert, explaining how elderly lottery winners were particularly vulnerable to exploitation. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. They were trying to turn public opinion against me, to make it seem like they were the caring family members, and I was the confused old woman being taken advantage of. When the segment ended, I sat frozen, the remote still clutched in my hand. The phone rang again, Diana this time. I saw it, I said numbly before she could speak. We need to respond, she said, her voice grim. They've taken this public. We need to counter with the truth.
How?
I asked. Who's going to believe an old woman over that performance? More people than you think, Diana said firmly. Melissa made a critical mistake. She's claiming medical conditions that don't exist. We have your recent comprehensive evaluations. We have evidence of their attempts to manipulate and intimidate you. And most importantly, we have the timeline of their abandonment and sudden reappearance when money was involved. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we fight fire with fire. A press conference. Today, before our meeting, we tell your side of the story with evidence to back it up. The thought of facing cameras, of exposing my private pain to the world, made me physically ill. But what choice did I have? Melissa had drawn the battle lines. What about Sophie and Ethan? I asked, thinking of my grandchildren. This will hurt them. Diana's voice softened. Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is difficult. But consider that your grandchildren are already being hurt by the lies their parents are telling them, by being used as pawns in this game. Sometimes the truth, painful as it may be, is the kindest thing in the long run. She was right. I knew she was right. But it didn't make what I had to do any easier. 3 hours later, I stood in the conference room of Diana's law firm, facing a half-dozen reporters and 3 television cameras. My hands trembled so badly that I had to grip the podium to steady them. But my voice, when I spoke, was clear and strong. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. 3 weeks ago, I won $100 million in the Powerball lottery. 2 days later, my daughter Melissa appeared at my door after 10 years of complete silence. I told the simple truth. About Melissa and Richard's abandonment. About the decade without contact. About their sudden reappearance and immediate demand for my money. About Melissa's cruel words, "You'll die soon anyway." I explained my decision to secure my future and create a charitable foundation. I detailed the campaign of intimidation that followed, the imposters, the false medical emergency, the attempts to suggest I was mentally unfit. I'm not holding a press conference because I want attention, I concluded. I'm doing this because my daughter has left me no choice. She has taken private family matters public and presented a version of events that is demonstrably false. Diana stepped forward then, presenting reporters with copies of my medical evaluations, witness statements from real neighbors, and a timeline documenting Melissa's absence and sudden return. She explained the family trust one had established, money set aside specifically for Melissa and her children, accessible only through genuine family connection. Mrs. Mitchell is not cutting off her family, Diana emphasized. She is simply asking for what anyone would want, real relationship, not exploitation. When the questions began, they were surprisingly gentle. Maybe it was my age, or the obvious pain in my voice when I spoke of my grandchildren. Maybe it was the clear documentation Diana had provided. Whatever the reason, I felt the tide of public opinion shifting in that room. The final question came from a young reporter in the back. "Mrs. Mitchell, what would you say to your daughter if she were here right now?" I looked directly into the nearest camera, knowing Melissa would see this footage. I would say that it's not too late. 10 years is a long time, but it's not forever. The money in that family trust isn't going anywhere. It will be there when you're ready to be family again. Real family. By the time the press conference ended, I felt wrung out, like a dish rag twisted too many times. But I also felt something unexpected. Relief. After a decade of silent pain, I had finally spoken my truth. Diana squeezed my shoulder as the reporters filed out. "You did wonderfully. Now, are you ready for the real confrontation? Melissa and Richard will be here in an hour." I nodded, though my stomach churned at the thought. I'm ready. But Melissa and Richard never showed up for a meeting. Instead, Diana's phone rang at precisely 2 p.m. It was Richard's lawyer, informing us that they would not be attending and that all further communication should go through legal channels. "They're backing off," Diana said after hanging up, looking surprised. "The press conference must have rattled them more than we expected." "Or they're regrouping," I said, the knot in my stomach tightening. "Planning something else." Diana nodded grimly. "That's certainly possible. But at least we've shifted the battlefield. They can't claim you're confused or being manipulated, not with the evidence we've made public." I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. I had won this round, yes, but at what cost? My private pain was now public knowledge. My family's dysfunction was headline news. And Melissa, my only child, the baby I had once rocked to sleep, was now my declared enemy. I went home that evening to a house that felt emptier than ever, despite the security personnel stationed outside. Victor insisted on checking every room before leaving me alone. "Call if you need anything," he said at the door. "Anything at all, Mrs. Mitchell. No matter the time." I thanked him and locked the door behind him. Then I sank onto my sofa, too tired even to cry. The silence was broken by my phone pinging with a text message. An unknown number, but I recognized the area code as local. "Saw you on TV. Brave lady.
Good for you."
Denise from Harvey's Gas. A small thing, that text. But it warmed me, reminding me that not everyone in the world was motivated by greed. That there were still kind people, like the pink-haired cashier who had sold me the winning ticket. I was about to reply when my landline rang. I checked the caller ID. Block number? and hesitated. After the fake hospital call, I was wary of answering, but something compelled me to pick up. "Grandma?" A girl's voice, tentative and scared. "It's Sophie." "Sophie," I breathed. "Are you all right?" "Where are you?" "At home. Mom and Dad are out. They're so mad about your TV thing." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Dad broke the living room TV. Just smashed it." Fear clutched at my heart. "Sophie, are you safe?" "Is Ethan safe?" "I guess. Dad's never hit us or anything. He just yells a lot. And throws stuff." Not exactly reassuring. "Can you get to a friend's house?" "Somewhere away from them for a while." "Maybe. I don't know."
She paused.
"Was it true? What you said on TV? About them not letting you see us for 10 years. My throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. It's true. I tried to call, to send cards and gifts. They were always returned. Mom said you didn't care about us, that you thought we were burdens." The cruelty of the lie stole my breath. "Sophie, listen to me. You and Ethan have never, ever been burdens. You're my grandchildren. I've loved you every single day, even when I couldn't see you." She was quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then, in a small voice, "I remember you a little. You used to make cookies shaped like stars." Tears sprang to my eyes.
"Yes."
"With cinnamon sugar on top. I liked those." Another pause. "Mom's coming home. I have to go." "Sophie, wait." But she was gone. I sat clutching the phone, torn between joy at having spoken to my granddaughter and terror at what might happen to her for reaching out to me. I called Diana immediately. "My granddaughter just called. I'm worried about her and Ethan. Richard is becoming violent, breaking things, yelling." Diana's response was immediate. "I'll contact family services tonight. We'll request a welfare check. If there's any sign of danger, we can petition for emergency custody." Custody. The word hit me like a thunderbolt. "You think that's possible?" "It's a long shot," she admitted. "But given what's happening, and with your resources to provide a stable home, it's not out of the question. Especially if the children themselves express a preference." The thought of having Sophie and Ethan with me, safe, away from the toxic environment of Melissa and Richard's greed and rage, filled me with a desperate hope. "Do whatever it takes," I told Diana. "Whatever it costs. Just help me protect them." I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of Sophie and Ethan, of star-shaped cookies and lost years. I woke to my phone ringing at dawn. It was Victor, his voice urgent. "Mrs. Mitchell, you need to check the news. Right now." Again, I fumbled for the remote, my heart pounding. And again, my daughter's face filled the screen. But this time, she wasn't tearfully concerned. She was triumphant. "Breaking news this morning," the anchor announced. "Dramatic developments in the lottery family dispute we reported on yesterday. Melissa Cantwell, daughter of Powerball winner Eleanor Mitchell, has just announced that she has filed for emergency guardianship of her mother, citing concerns about financial exploitation." The camera cut to Melissa, standing on the steps of the county courthouse, looking somber but determined. "This is not about money," she declared, Richard standing supportively at her side. "This is about protecting my mother from people who are taking advantage of her vulnerability. The court has granted us temporary conservatorship pending a full hearing." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Conservatorship? They couldn't. They wouldn't. But as the reporter continued, explaining that a judge had issued an emergency ruling based on evidence presented overnight, I realized that they had. Somehow, Melissa and Richard had convinced a judge, without my knowledge, without my presence, without my testimony, to grant them control over my life and my decisions. The phone rang again. Diana, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I just heard. I'm filing countermotions immediately. This won't stand, Eleanor. I promise you that. They must have judge shopped, found someone willing to sign without a proper hearing." "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice faint with shock. "Right now, what does it mean?" Diana hesitated. "Legally, it means they have temporary authority to make financial and medical decisions for you. but it's only temporary. We'll get it overturned. How temporary? Until the full hearing. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks with Melissa and Richard legally in control of my life. 2 weeks for them to try to undo everything I had put in place to protect myself and my money. Can they access the trusts? I asked, fear making my voice shake. The foundation? My personal accounts? No, Diana said firmly. Those arrangements were made before any question of competency. They're separate legal entities with independent trustees. They can't touch them. That was something, at least. But still, the violation was profound. They had gone to a court, behind my back, and convinced a judge that I was incapable of managing my own affairs. That I needed to be controlled, like a child, or a senile old woman. What do I do now? I asked Diana. Stay calm. Stay home. I'm sending our litigation team to your house right now. Don't speak to anyone else, especially not Melissa or Richard, until we arrive. I hung up and sat in my living room, staring at the silent TV screen. The world had turned upside down yet again. Just when I thought I had taken control of my life, Melissa had found a new way to try to wrest it back. Outside, I heard a car door slam. Then another. Looking through the window, I saw 2 unfamiliar vehicles in my driveway. A man in a suit emerged from one, a woman from the other. Neither was Melissa or Richard, but something in their purposeful stride toward my house sent a chill through me.
The doorbell rang.
I didn't answer. It rang again, more insistently. Then came a loud knock. Mrs. Mitchell? A male voice called. We're here on behalf of your daughter, Melissa Cantwell. We have court papers to serve you and to begin an inventory of the premises. Inventory of the premises? They were going to go through my home? My private things? My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Do not let anyone in. Our team is 10 minutes away. The knocking continued, growing more forceful. Mrs. Mitchell, we know you're in there. If you don't open the door, we'll have to call the authorities. My hands shook as I texted Diana back. They're threatening to call police. Her response was immediate. Let them. Police will wait for our team to arrive with counterpapers. So I sat, my back against the door, as the knocking continued and voices grew more demanding. I heard them on the phone, presumably calling the police as threatened. I heard more car doors, more voices. And then, finally, blessed familiar voices, Diana's crisp tones, another woman speaking with legal authority, Victor's rumbling assurance. I opened the door to find my front yard transformed into a battlefield of suits and legal papers. Diana stood facing Melissa's representatives, a uniformed police officer looking uncomfortable between them. This emergency conservatorship was granted without proper procedure, Diana was saying, brandishing documents. My client was not notified, was not present, had no representation. We have filed an immediate stay pending proper hearing. One of Melissa's lawyers, a sharp-faced man with cold eyes, sneered. The judge found sufficient evidence of incapacity to warrant emergency action. Your client's own press conference demonstrated her instability. My press conference? I said, stepping onto the porch. Speaking the truth is instability now. All eyes turned to me. The police officer looked me up and down, clearly noting that I was dressed, coherent, and appeared perfectly competent. Ma'am, he said, there seems to be a legal dispute here that's above my pay grade. Since both parties have court papers, I'm going to step back and let the courts sort this out. It was a small victory, but an important one. The officer's refusal to enforce Melissa's papers bought us precious time. Diana's litigation specialist, a formidable woman named Rachel, stepped forward. We have filed for an emergency hearing this afternoon. Judge Watkins has agreed to review the conservatorship order. Melissa's lawyers exchanged glances. They hadn't expected such swift counteraction. In the meantime, Rachel continued, no one enters Mrs. Mitchell's home. No inventories. No seizures of documents. The status quo remains until the judge rules. They left, finally, Melissa's people retreating to their cars with barely concealed fury. Diana and her team came inside, transforming my living room into a war room of legal strategy. "They're desperate," Diana said, spreading papers across my coffee table. The press conference backed them into a corner. "This is a Hail Mary attempt to regain control." "But a judge signed it," I said, still shaken. "A judge looked at whatever they presented and decided I needed to be controlled." Rachel shook her head. Ex parte emergency orders like this are unfortunately common in conservatorship cases. They found a judge willing to sign based on one-sided evidence. Once we present the full picture this afternoon, it will almost certainly be overturned. "Almost certainly," I repeated, "but not definitely." Diana met my eyes. "Nothing in law is definite, Eleanor. But we have truth on our side. And substantial evidence." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her confidence. But a cold fear had settled in my bones. For the first time, I truly understood what I was up against. Not just Melissa and Richard's greed, but a system that could, with the stroke of a pen, strip away my autonomy, my dignity, my very personhood. As Diana and her team prepared for the emergency hearing, I sat quietly, watching them work. The money that had seemed like such a blessing 3 weeks ago now felt like a curse. It had brought my daughter back into my life, yes, but as an enemy, not as family. It had exposed the worst in her, the worst in Richard, and now threatened to tear apart what remained of our family. And yet, there was Sophie and Ethan, my grandchildren, reaching out to me after years of separation. Perhaps, somehow, something good could still come from all this pain and betrayal. The hearing was set for 4 p.m. As we prepared to leave for the courthouse, my phone pinged with a text. "Unknown number again. Heard what Mom did. It's messed up. We're coming to the courthouse. We want to tell the judge the truth. Ethan." I showed the message to Diana, hope and fear warring in my heart. "Can they testify?" I asked. "They're minors." "That's up to the judge," she said. "But their presence alone would be powerful. If they've chosen to come on their own." She didn't need to finish the thought. If Sophie and Ethan had decided to stand with me against their parents, it would speak volumes about the true dynamic in our family. As our car pulled away from my house, headed for the courthouse, and the hearing that would determine whether I remained a free woman or became a ward of my estranged daughter, I thought again of that lottery ticket. $5 spent on a whim that had changed everything. For better or worse remained to be seen. What I didn't know, as we drove through the familiar streets of the town I'd called home for 40 years, was that the true battle and the most devastating betrayal was yet to come. The courthouse loomed before us like something out of a nightmare, all imposing columns and stone steps, a place where strangers would decide my fate. Diana's hand rested reassuringly on my arm as we climbed those steps, but nothing could calm the storm in my chest. I had spent 65 years making my own decisions. Good ones, bad ones, they were mine. The thought that someone could take that away, that a judge could hand control of my life to Melissa and Richard, made me physically ill. "Remember," Diana whispered as we approached the courtroom doors, "Judge Watkins is known for being thorough. He won't be easily swayed by Melissa's theatrics." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. But as we entered the courtroom and I saw Melissa and Richard already seated at the respondents' table, my confidence wavered. They looked polished, professional, the picture of concerned family members. Richard in a conservative suit, Melissa in a modest navy dress, her hair pulled back in a simple style that made her look less glamorous and more trustworthy. They had dressed for their roles, just as I had dressed for mine: simple slacks and a cardigan, comfortable shoes. Looking exactly like what I was, a normal, competent older woman. Not too fancy, which might suggest frivolity, nor too casual, which might suggest confusion. As we took our seats, Melissa's eyes met mine. There was no warmth there, no hint of the child I had raised. Just cold determination. I looked away, unable to bear the stranger my daughter had become. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Watkins entered, a tall man with silver hair and piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He settled behind the bench and reviewed the papers before him, his expression giving nothing away. "This is an unusual situation," he began, looking up at last. I have before me an emergency conservatorship granted by Judge Heller yesterday evening. I also have an emergency motion to dissolve said conservatorship, filed this morning. Let's be clear about what we're doing here today. This is not a full conservatorship hearing that would require more extensive evaluation and testimony. This is strictly to determine whether the emergency order should remain in place until that full hearing. He looked directly at Melissa's attorney, a slick-looking man named Bradford Taylor, whose reputation for aggressive elder law cases preceded him. Mr. Taylor, as the party who secured the emergency order, please explain why it was necessary to proceed without Mrs. Mitchell's knowledge or presence. Taylor rose smoothly. Your Honor, my clients had genuine and immediate concerns for Mrs. Mitchell's welfare. Since winning the lottery 3 weeks ago, she has been making increasingly erratic financial decisions, including giving away $50 million to newly created charities with minimal oversight. More concerning, she has surrounded herself with new advisors who stand to profit significantly from these arrangements. My hands clenched in my lap.
Lies.
All lies. Furthermore, Taylor continued, Mrs. Mitchell has been exhibiting paranoid behavior, installing excessive security, making wild accusations against family members, and isolating herself from longtime neighbors and friends. We feared that waiting for a standard hearing would allow these exploitative individuals to continue their undue influence, potentially resulting in the complete dissipation of her assets. Judge Watkins listened impassively, then turned to Diana. Ms. Levinson, your response? Diana stood, her posture confident. Your Honor, Mr. Taylor's characterization is not just misleading, it's demonstrably false. Mrs. Mitchell's financial decisions were made with the counsel of reputable advisors recommended by the Lottery Commission itself. The charitable foundation he dismisses so casually is fully legitimate, with a proper board and oversight. She held up a thick folder. We have complete documentation of all financial arrangements, including psychiatric evaluations confirming Mrs. Mitchell's competence, videotaped meetings showing her clear understanding and direction of these decisions, and statements from actual neighbors, not the fictional ones Mr. Taylor's clients found to speak to the media. I watched Judge Watkins's face carefully. Was that a flicker of surprise? Of skepticism toward Taylor's claims? As for the security measures, Diana continued, they were unfortunately necessary because Mrs. Mitchell's daughter and son-in-law began a campaign of intimidation immediately after learning about the lottery win. We have evidence of individuals impersonating health officials to gain access to her home, a false emergency call claiming her granddaughter was hospitalized, and a door-to-door campaign in her neighborhood suggesting she was mentally unfit. Now the judge's eyebrows definitely rose. These are serious allegations, Ms. Levinson. Yes, Your Honor, they are. And we can prove every one of them. Diana nodded to Rachel, who approached the bench with another folder. Here are sworn statements from Mrs. Mitchell's neighbors regarding the man who claimed to be from Adult Protective Services, but was later seen getting into Mr. Cantwell's car. Here is the recording of the false hospital call, along with confirmation from St. Mary's that no such call was placed by their staff. And here are the security camera images of the woman who falsely claimed to be from the health department. Judge Watkins took the folder, his expression growing more severe as he reviewed its contents. When he looked up, his gaze fixed on Melissa and Richard, who suddenly seemed less confident. Mr. Taylor, were you aware of these allegations? Taylor cleared his throat. Your Honor, we dispute these characterizations. My clients were legitimately concerned about Mrs. Mitchell's welfare and were attempting to check on her through various means after she refused direct contact. By impersonating medical personnel? The judge asked sharply. By spreading false rumors among her neighbors? Before Taylor could respond, the courtroom doors opened. All heads turned as two teenagers entered hesitantly, a boy and a girl, both with Melissa's blonde hair but softer features that reminded me painfully of Frank. Sophie and Ethan. My grandchildren. Melissa half rose from her seat, her face contorting with shock and anger. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at school. Judge Watkins frowned. Who are these young people? Diana stepped forward. Your Honor, these are Sophie and Ethan Cantwell, Mrs. Mitchell's grandchildren. I believe they may have relevant testimony. "We want to talk," Sophie said, her voice small but determined in the hushed courtroom. "About what's really happening." The judge studied them thoughtfully. "This is highly unusual. They appear to be minors. Are their parents aware they're here?" "We're 17 and 15, Ethan said quickly. "Old enough to take an Uber and tell the truth." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Melissa was fully standing now, her face flushed. "Your Honor, my children should not be involved in these proceedings. They don't understand the situation." "We understand plenty," Sophie countered, her voice stronger now. "We understand that you and Dad lied to us about Grandma for years. You said she didn't want to see us, that she thought we were burdens." My heart twisted painfully. Diana had warned me that this might be difficult to hear, but nothing could have prepared me for the raw hurt in my granddaughter's voice. Judge Watkins held up his hand. "This is becoming quite complicated. Young people, I'm not certain I can allow formal testimony from minors in this proceeding without proper protocols. However," he paused, considering, "I am inclined to have a brief conversation with you in my chambers, with representatives from both parties present." Taylor immediately objected. "Your Honor, these children have clearly been influenced by Mrs. Mitchell. Their sudden appearance is obviously orchestrated." "That's not true," Ethan interrupted. "We came because we saw Grandma on TV yesterday. She told the truth about how you and Mom kept us away from her. We found the old birthday cards and letters she sent us that you hid in the attic storage boxes. We know you lied." The courtroom fell silent. Melissa sank slowly back into her seat, her face ashen. Richard leaned over, whispering urgently in her ear, but she seemed beyond hearing. Judge Watkins's gaze swept the courtroom, taking in Melissa's shock, my grandchildren's defiance, and my own stunned expression. I had known about the hidden cards and letters. I had sent them faithfully for years, with no response. To learn that Melissa had kept them, had deliberately hidden them from Sophie and Ethan, it was yet another betrayal. 15-minute recess, the judge announced, rising from the bench. "Ms. Levinson, Mr. Taylor, the minor children, and one parent, please join me in chambers." As Melissa followed the judge and lawyers out, Richard remained behind, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. His eyes locked with mine across the courtroom, filled with such hatred that I physically recoiled. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. The 15 minutes stretched into 30, then 45. I sat alone at our table, Victor standing protectively nearby, as Richard paced the back of the courtroom like a caged animal. The tension was unbearable. Finally, the chamber doors opened. Sophie and Ethan emerged first, their faces tear-streaked but somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. They glanced at me, and Sophie gave a small, tentative smile before a court officer led them to seats in the back of the room. Diana followed, her expression carefully neutral. Then Melissa, her makeup smudged and her earlier poise completely shattered. Last came Taylor, looking distinctly uncomfortable, the expression of a lawyer who knows he's on the losing side. Judge Watkins resumed his seat and surveyed the courtroom with grave eyes. Having reviewed the evidence presented by both parties and after speaking with the minor children involved, I am prepared to rule on the emergency conservatorship. He shuffled his papers, then looked directly at me. "Mrs. Mitchell, based on the documentation provided by your counsel and my own observations of you today, I see no evidence whatsoever that you are incapable of managing your affairs or making your own decisions. The emergency conservatorship is hereby dissolved, effective immediately." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I nearly wept. My freedom, my autonomy, they were still mine. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, his gaze now fixed on Melissa and Richard, "I find the manner in which this emergency order was obtained to be deeply troubling. The evidence suggests a pattern of deception and manipulation that raises serious ethical and potentially legal concerns." He turned to Taylor. "Mr. Taylor, I will be referring this matter to the State Bar for review. At minimum, you presented incomplete and misleading information to Judge Heller to secure the emergency order." Taylor paled but remained silent. "As for you, Mr. and Mrs. Cantwell," the judge continued, I am sufficiently concerned about your conduct that I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing you from approaching within 500 feet of Mrs. Mitchell or her residence, pending the full hearing. I am also ordering a full investigation by Family Services regarding the welfare of your children, given the disturbing allegations they have raised. Melissa made a choked sound. Richard's face went from red to purple. Your Honor, Taylor began. Surely that's excessive. It is not, Judge Watkins interrupted sharply. Had you presented honest information to Judge Heller, we wouldn't be here today. Mrs. Mitchell has the right to be protected from further harassment while these matters are fully investigated. He tapped his gavel. This emergency hearing is adjourned. The full conservatorship hearing remains on the calendar for 2 weeks from today, though based on what I've seen, I would strongly advise the petitioners to consider withdrawing their application. With that, he rose and exited the courtroom, leaving stunned silence in his wake. I sat frozen, trying to absorb what had just happened. The conservatorship was dissolved. I was free. Melissa and Richard were barred from approaching me. And somehow, miraculously, Sophie and Ethan had chosen to stand with me. Diana squeezed my hand. We won, Eleanor. Completely. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted across the courtroom. Richard had grabbed Melissa's arm and was practically dragging her toward the exit, his face contorted with rage. As they passed the bench where Sophie and Ethan sat, he barked, "Let's go. Now." Sophie stood, defiance in every line of her body.
No.
Richard froze. "What did you say to me, young lady?" I said no. Sophie's voice shook, but she held her ground. "We're not going with you. Not after everything we heard today." Ethan stood beside his sister. "We want to stay with Grandma." The courtroom had emptied except for our small group and 2 security officers watching the scene unfold with wary eyes. Richard stepped toward the teenagers, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't get to make that decision. You're minors. You're coming home.
Now."
I was on my feet before I realized I'd moved. "Don't you dare threaten them." Richard's head whipped around, his eyes wild. "This is your doing. You turned them against us with your money and your lies." "The only lies were yours," I said steadily. 10 years of them. Melissa, who had been eerily silent, suddenly spoke. "You've ruined everything. Again." Her voice was cold, empty. "Just like you ruined things with Dad. Just like you ruined my childhood with your neediness and your rules and your disappointment." The accusation struck me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? Your father, and I gave you everything we could. You gave me criticism, standards I could never meet. Dad understood me. He protected me from you until he couldn't anymore." I stared at my daughter, this stranger with familiar eyes, and realized we were looking at completely different pasts. In her mind, I was the villain of her story, a story so twisted from reality that I hardly recognized it. "Melissa," I said softly, "that's not what happened. Your father loved you, yes, but he didn't shield you from me. We were a team." "Liar," she hissed. "He told me the truth before he died. How you controlled everything. How you suffocated him just like you tried to suffocate me." Something cold and terrible settled in my stomach. What poison had been festering in my daughter's mind all these years? What warped version of our family history had she constructed to justify her actions? Before I could respond, the court security officers stepped forward. "Take this outside, folks. Court's adjourned." Diana intervened smoothly. "My client has a restraining order against these individuals. They need to leave first, and we'll exit separately." The officers nodded, turning to Melissa and Richard. "You heard the lady. Time to go." Richard looked like he might explode, but Taylor placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Don't make this worse," he murmured. "There are witnesses." With a final venomous glare in my direction, Richard turned and stormed out. Melissa followed, her posture rigid, not looking back even as Sophie called after her. "Mom? Mom, please." But Melissa kept walking, leaving her children standing abandoned in the middle of the courtroom. The silence that followed their exit was deafening. Sophie's shoulders slumped, and Ethan's face crumpled. Whatever they had expected, Anger, yes, but perhaps also understanding, some acknowledgement of their feelings. They hadn't anticipated complete rejection. I moved toward them hesitantly, unsure whether they would welcome my comfort. But Sophie turned to me, tears streaming down her face, suddenly looking much younger than her 17 years. She didn't even look back, she whispered. I opened my arms, and to my amazement, she stepped into them. Ethan joined a moment later, and suddenly I was holding my grandchildren for the first time in a decade, their tears soaking into my cardigan. Diana approached quietly. We need to address the immediate practical situation, she said. The children technically can't stay with you without formal custody arrangements. Sophie pulled back, wiping her eyes. We don't want to go home. Not after this. And I don't want to send you back there, I said. But Diana's right. There are legal processes we have to follow. Actually, Diana said, given the judge's order for a family services investigation and the restraining order against your parents, we have grounds to request emergency temporary custody for your grandmother. It's not guaranteed, but with your ages and stated preferences, it's possible. Hope flickered in Ethan's eyes. So, we could stay with Grandma tonight? Let me make some calls, Diana said. If we can get before Judge Watkins again today, maybe. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Diana worked her legal magic, getting us back before Judge Watkins for a brief emergency hearing. Family Services representatives interviewed Sophie and Ethan. Court-appointed evaluators spoke with all of us. By 6 o'clock that evening, I had temporary custody of my grandchildren for 2 weeks until the already scheduled full hearing on the conservatorship petition, which would now also address permanent custody arrangements. I sat in Diana's office, stunned by the day's events. In the morning, I had been fighting for my basic freedom. By evening, I had not only secured that freedom, but had also become responsible for 2 teenagers I barely knew. Are you all right? Diana asked gently. This is a lot to absorb. I searched for the right word. Overwhelmed, grateful, terrified. She smiled. All appropriate reactions. But Eleanor, you should know, those kids adore you already. The way they stood up for you today, without prompting, without coaching, that's remarkable. They stood up against their parents. I corrected. That's not the same as standing up for me. I think it's both, Diana said. They saw the truth and chose it, even though it was the harder path. That shows extraordinary character. Sophie and Ethan were waiting in the conference room, looking exhausted but somehow lighter than they had in the courtroom. When I entered, they both looked up anxiously. It's official, I told them. You're coming home with me. For now, at least. Relief washed over their faces, followed quickly by uncertainty. None of us quite knew what came next. I know this is strange, I said, sitting down across from them. We're practically strangers, but we're also family. We'll figure it out together, a day at a time. Ethan nodded solemnly. We found her cards. In the attic. All of them, for every birthday and Christmas. Mom told us you never remembered. My throat tightened. I remembered every year. I kept hoping.
We know that now, Sophie said.
We know a lot of things now. There was so much left unspoken in that simple statement. So much pain and betrayal and lost time. But also, perhaps, the beginning of healing. The house that had seemed so empty that morning felt transformed by evening, filled with the quiet sounds of my grandchildren settling in. Victor had gone ahead to prepare, making sure the guest rooms were ready, ordering food, what did teenagers eat these days, and doubling the security presence. Just as a precaution, he assured me when I raised an eyebrow at the additional guards. Your son-in-law didn't seem like the type to respect a restraining order.
He was right about that.
Richard's fury in the courtroom had been barely contained. And Melissa, the cold emptiness in her eyes when she walked away from her children haunted me. These were not people who would accept defeat gracefully. That first evening together was awkward but sweet. We ate delivery pizza around my small kitchen table, the same table where Frank and I had once fed a young Melissa. Sophie and Ethan were tentative, polite, careful not to break the fragile new connection between us. I showed them to their rooms, spaces that had stood empty for years, quickly transformed with fresh linens and hastily purchased toiletries. Tomorrow we would need to figure out how to retrieve their clothes and personal items from Melissa and Richard's house. Tomorrow we would need to contact their schools, explain the situation, make arrangements. But tonight was just about being safe, being together. As I was turning down my own bed, there was a soft knock at my door. Sophie stood there, looking small in borrowed pajamas. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course, sweetheart."
Anything.
She twisted her hands nervously. "Did you and Mom really not talk for 10 whole years? Or was that exaggerated?" For the court, I sat on the edge of my bed, patting the space beside me. Sophie perched there tentatively. "It's true," I said gently. "After your grandfather died, things between your mother and me became strained. When you were 7 and Ethan was 5, she came to my birthday dinner and asked for a loan I couldn't give. That was the last time I saw any of you until she showed up after the lottery win." Sophie's eyes widened. "Because of money? She stopped talking to you over money." I hesitated, not wanting to demonize Melissa despite everything.
I think it was more complicated than that.
"Your mother and we never quite understood each other. Even when she was young, your grandfather was better at connecting with her." "But 10 years," Sophie whispered. "And she told us you were the one who didn't want us around." "I wanted you around more than anything," I said, my voice cracking. "You and Ethan were the lights of my life." Sophie was quiet for a long moment. "I remember a little. The star cookies. And a garden? Did we plant flowers together?" Joy bloomed in my chest.
Yes.
"Marigolds and zinnias. You loved the orange ones." "I still do," she said with a small smile. "Orange is my favorite color." Such a simple thing. A favorite color. One of countless details I should have known about my granddaughter, but didn't. 10 years of memories and growth and change that I had missed. "I'd like to plant flowers again," I said. "If you want to." Sophie nodded. "I'd like that." She hesitated, then asked, "What happens after the 2 weeks? Will we have to go back to them?" The question I had been dreading. "I don't know, sweetheart. It will depend on what the judge decides, what the Family Services investigation finds, and what you and Ethan want." "We want to stay with you," she said immediately. "We already talked about it." My heart swelled, but I needed to be honest. It might not be that simple. Your parents have legal rights. And despite everything, they are still your parents. Sophie's face hardened in a way that reminded me painfully of Melissa. They gave up the right to call themselves that when they lied to us our whole lives. When Mom walked away, without looking back, I took her hand gently. "Try not to judge too harshly just yet. People make terrible mistakes, especially when they're angry or hurt. That doesn't erase the good things." "Were there good things?" she asked, so quietly I almost didn't hear. "With Mom, I mean. When she was little?" This, at least, was a question I could answer with complete honesty. "So many good things. Your mother was bright and curious and determined. She could spend hours drawing the same picture until she got it exactly right. She loved stories about brave girls having adventures. And when she laughed, really laughed, it was the most beautiful sound in the world." Sophie listened intently, hungry for these glimpses of a mother different from the one she knew. What happened to her? That was the question that had haunted me for years. "I wish I knew, sweetheart."
People change.
They make choices. They tell themselves stories to justify those choices. Over time, the stories become more real to them than what actually happened. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was the only one I had. Sophie seemed to understand, nodding slowly before standing up. "Good night, Grandma," she said, the title still new and slightly awkward on her tongue. "Good night, Sophie. I'm so glad you're here." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet of my room, trying to process the day's seismic shifts. This morning, I had been a solitary woman fighting for her autonomy. Tonight, I was a grandmother with 2 teenagers under my roof and a daughter who hated me more than ever. It should have been overwhelming, and it was in many ways. But underneath the worry and uncertainty was a current of something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. These children needed me. Not my money, not my house me. My love, my guidance, my protection. For the first time since winning the lottery, I felt truly fortunate. That feeling lasted until my phone rang at midnight. Unknown number. Hello. I answered cautiously. You think you've won. Richard's voice, slurred and menacing. You haven't. My blood ran cold. Richard, you're violating the restraining order. I'm hanging up and calling my lawyer. Go ahead, he sneered. Won't change what's coming. You took our kids. You took our money. You'll regret it. Are you threatening me? I kept my voice steady even as fear coiled in my stomach. I'm promising you, this isn't over. His voice dropped lower. Accidents happen to old ladies all the time, especially rich ones. The line went dead. I sat frozen, the phone still clutched in my hand. Had my son-in-law just threatened my life? Or was it just the ranting of a drunk, angry man? Either way, I couldn't take chances, not with Sophie and Ethan under my roof. I called Victor, who answered immediately despite the hour. I need the security team alerted, I told him, relaying Richard's call. And I want to report this to the police. Victor arrived 30 minutes later with a police officer. They took my statement, listened to the recording my phone had automatically made of the call, a feature Diana had insisted I activate, and promised to investigate. We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood, the officer assured me. And with the restraining order already in place, this gives us grounds to bring him in for questioning at minimum. I thanked them, but as they left, unease lingered. Richard's threat felt too specific, too calculated to be merely drunk bluster. The man I had seen in court, cold, controlling, furious at being thwarted, was capable of more than just words. I checked on Sophie and Ethan, finding them both peacefully asleep, blissfully unaware of this new threat. I wouldn't burden them with it, I decided. They had been through enough. Instead, I returned to my room and sat by the window, watching the security team patrol my property in the moonlight. The suburban street where I had lived for 40 years suddenly seemed foreign and dangerous. My phone pinged with a text message. Diana, responding to my earlier call. Emergency restraining order violation filed. Police notified. Don't worry, we're on this. Try to get some sleep. Sleep seemed impossible, but I was exhausted. I lay down, leaving the bedside lamp on, and eventually drifted into fitful dreams filled with shadowy figures and Melissa's empty eyes. I woke to sunshine and the unfamiliar sound of teenage footsteps in my hallway. For a moment, I was disoriented, then the previous day's events came rushing back. The courtroom, the custody ruling, Richard's threatening call. I dressed quickly and found Sophie and Ethan in the kitchen, awkwardly searching for breakfast. Good morning, I said, trying to sound normal despite my lingering unease. How did you sleep? Good, Ethan said, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. Do you have any cereal? Such an ordinary question. It grounded me, pulling me back from the edge of fear to the practical reality of caring for two teenagers. I'm afraid my pantry isn't very teen-friendly, I admitted. But we can fix that. How about we go shopping after breakfast? Get whatever you like. And we should pick up some clothes and things for you too. What about our stuff from home?
Sophie asked.
Our computers and phones and clothes? This was the question I'd been dreading. We'll need to arrange to collect your things. Diana, my lawyer, is working on that. But it might take a day or two to set up something safe. Safe. Ethan's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I hesitated, not wanting to frighten them, but needing to be honest. Your father was upset last night. He called me, said some things that concerned me. Sophie's face hardened. What things? It doesn't matter, I said, forcing a smile. The police are aware, and we have security. Everything's fine. But Sophie, it seemed, had inherited my ability to see through evasions. He threatened you, didn't he? Because of us. I sighed, abandoning the pretense.
Yes.
But it was probably just anger talking. People say things they don't mean when they're upset. Dad doesn't, Ethan said quietly. When he threatens something, he means it. The simple certainty in his voice chilled me. These children knew Richard far better than I did. If they took his threats seriously, perhaps I should too. Well, that's why we have security, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. And the police are looking for him now. Before either could respond, my phone rang. Diana. Eleanor, she said without preamble, the police went to Melissa and Richard's house this morning. They're gone. My stomach dropped. Gone? What do you mean, gone? The house is empty. Neighbors say they saw them loading suitcases into their car around 2 a.m. They left in a hurry. I glanced at Sophie and Ethan, who were watching me with wide, worried eyes. I'll call you back, I told Diana, stepping into the living room for privacy. Once alone, I asked, do the police have any idea where they went? Not yet. Credit cards and phones are inactive. They may have burner phones and cash. Diana paused. Eleanor, this is concerning. Fleeing like this, after the restraining order violation and threat, it suggests premeditation. The implication hung unspoken between us. Richard hadn't just been making drunk threats. He had a plan. What do we do? I asked. The police are treating this seriously. They've issued a bolo. Be on the lookout for Richard's car. In the meantime, don't go anywhere without security. No regular patterns, no predictable schedules. And the children? Should I tell them? Diana sighed. They have a right to know that their parents have left town, but perhaps focus on the fact that the police are looking for them, rather than why. I agreed and hung up, trying to compose myself before returning to the kitchen. But when I turned around, Sophie and Ethan were standing in the doorway. From their faces, I could tell they had heard enough. They ran away, didn't they?
Sophie asked.
Because of what Dad said to you. I nodded, seeing no point in lying. It seems that way. The police are looking for them. Ethan's face had gone pale. You don't know what Dad's like when he gets like this. Really angry, I mean. Not just yelling angry. A chill ran through me. Has he ever hurt you? Or your mother? Both shook their heads, but Sophie added. Not physically. But he destroys things. And he doesn't let go of grudges. Ever. I drew them both into the living room, sitting them down on the sofa. Listen to me. Whatever your father is planning, whatever he thinks he's going to do, he won't succeed. We have security, we have the police involved, we have Diana and her team. You are safe here. I promise you that. They nodded, but I could see the fear lingering in their eyes. These children had grown up with Richard's volatility, his controlling nature. They knew what he was capable of in ways I was only beginning to understand. What do we do now? Ethan asked in a small voice. I squeezed his hand. We live our lives. We don't let fear control us. We get you enrolled in your schools, we buy groceries, we plant those flowers Sophie mentioned. And we trust the professionals to handle your parents. It sounded good, brave, and practical. But as the day progressed, with security guards accompanying us to the store, with police officers checking in hourly, with Diana's constant updates about the search for Melissa and Richard, the facade of normalcy became harder to maintain. Where had they gone? What were they planning? And most troubling of all, why had Melissa, who had always been controlled by Richard's stronger personality, chosen to flee with him rather than stay for her children? The answer came 3 days later, in the form of a plain envelope delivered to my door by courier. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not a letter, but a photocopy of what appeared to be an old medical record. At the top was my name, a hospital name, and a date from 38 years ago. And highlighted in angry yellow was a diagnosis: postpartum psychosis. My hands trembled as I stared at the document. This was from after Melissa's birth, a dark, frightening time I had worked hard to forget. A time when hormones and exhaustion had sent me spiraling into a brief, but terrifying episode of delusion and paranoia. Frank had taken me to the hospital. I had received treatment. I had recovered completely within weeks. And I had never, ever experienced another episode. But there it was in black and white, proof of mental illness in my past. Proof that Melissa and Richard had obviously found and planned to use against me. Attached was a short note in Richard's handwriting. Just the first of many. Still think you'll keep the kids and the money? We know all your secrets, Eleanor. See you in court. I sank onto the sofa, the paper clutched in my shaking hands. This was their plan, not violence but character assassination. They were going to dredge up every mistake, every weakness, every moment of vulnerability from my past, and use it to destroy me in court. And they had started with one of my deepest shames, a medical crisis I had never discussed with anyone outside my immediate family. Not even Diana knew about this part of my past. I was still sitting there, frozen with shock, when Sophie found me. "Grandma? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I quickly folded the paper, shoving it into my pocket. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just some old paperwork." But Sophie was too perceptive to be fooled. "Is it from them? Mom and Dad?" I hesitated, then nodded. There had been enough lies in this family.
Yes.
They're trying to find ways to discredit me before the full hearing. Sophie sat beside me, her young face serious beyond her years. "What did they send?" "Just some very old medical records," I said, trying to minimize it. "From long before you were born." "About what?" I sighed. This brilliant, wounded child deserved honesty. "After your mother was born, I experienced something called postpartum psychosis. It's a temporary condition that can happen to women after childbirth because of hormonal changes. I was hospitalized briefly, received treatment, and recovered completely. It never happened again." Sophie's brow furrowed. "And they think that matters now? Almost 40 years later, they think they can use it to suggest I'm mentally unstable, that I shouldn't have custody of you and Ethan." Anger flashed in Sophie's eyes, a righteous, protective anger that warmed my heart even as it concerned me. "That's ridiculous. And cruel. Mom knows that's not true." "Your mother." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Your mother was too young to remember any of this. She was just a baby. Whatever she knows, she's learned from medical records, not from experience." "Still," Sophie insisted, "she knows you now. She knows you're not whatever they're trying to say you are." Did she, though? I wondered. Did Melissa know me at all? Or had she constructed a version of me in her mind that suited her narrative, a controlling, unstable mother she was justified in abandoning? "We should tell Diana," Sophie said decisively. "She'll know what to do." She was right, of course. This wasn't something I could, or should, handle alone. I called Diana immediately. She listened gravely as I explained about the medical records, then asked me to scan and send them to her. "This is a transparent attempt at character assassination," she said after reviewing the documents. "And frankly, not a very effective one. A single episode of postpartum psychosis nearly 4 decades ago, with complete recovery and no recurrence, would have minimal impact on a modern custody case. But combined with other things they might find." I began. "What other things, Eleanor?" Diana asked gently. "Is there something else I should know?" I thought about my life, the 6.5 decades of it. Had I been perfect?
No.
I had made mistakes, experienced setbacks, faced challenges. But had I done anything that could legitimately be used to question my fitness as a guardian now? "Nothing I can think of," I said finally. "But they're desperate. They'll twist anything they can find." "Then we'll be prepared," Diana assured me. "This latest move actually works in our favor. The fact that they're resorting to digging up ancient medical records shows how little they have. And fleeing after making threats? That only strengthens our position." Her confidence steadied me. Still, as I hung up, unease lingered. Richard's note had been too confident, too smug. He believed he had more ammunition, enough to win not just custody but control of my money as well. What else had they found? What other secrets did they think they knew? The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Sophie and Ethan settled into a tentative routine in my home. We enrolled them in their schools, arranged for transportation with security, bought clothes and personal items to replace what remained at Melissa and Richard's house. On the surface, we were creating a new normal, but underneath ran a current of constant anxiety. Where were Melissa and Richard? What were they planning? Each day, I expected another envelope, another attack from my past. But none came. The silence was almost worse than the threat. A week after the first envelope arrived, Diana called with news. The police have located Melissa and Richard's car, she told me, abandoned at a long-term parking lot near the airport. They're checking flight manifests now. They've left the country? I asked, stunned. This seemed extreme, even for them. Not necessarily. They could have flown domestically. Or the car could be a red herring. Diana paused. There's something else. The police executed a search warrant on their home yesterday. They found something concerning. My heart raced. What? A room that appears to have been dedicated to investigating you. Walls covered with timelines, old photographs, notes. They had been compiling information for months, Eleanor. Long before the lottery win. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Months? That's not possible. They had no interest in me until the money. The evidence suggests otherwise. This wasn't a hastily assembled operation. It was methodical, long-term. Detective Morris described it as obsessive. I sank into a chair trying to process this. What does it mean? I'm not sure, Diana admitted. But it casts everything in a different light. This vendetta against you may not be solely about the lottery money. Then what is it about? I whispered. That's what we need to find out. The police are combing through everything they found. In the meantime, we need to prepare for the hearing next week. With Melissa and Richard gone, we'll likely be seeking a default judgment for permanent custody. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at nothing. A room dedicated to investigating me? Months of research? It made no sense. Melissa had shown no interest in my life for a decade. What could have prompted this sudden, secret obsession with my past? The answer came from an unexpected source. That evening, as I was helping Ethan with his math homework, Sophie appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, her face pale. I need to talk to you, she said. Alone. Something in her tone sent a chill through me. I nodded to Ethan, who gathered his books and headed upstairs, shooting his sister a curious glance. Once he was gone, Sophie sat across from me, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I found something on Dad's cloud storage. His cloud storage? I repeated, confused.
Yeah.
All our family photos and stuff are there. I still had the password from when I needed pictures for a school project. She pulled out her phone. I was looking for old photos of Mom from when she was younger, to see if she looked happy. My heart ached for this child, searching digital archives for evidence of her mother's joy. Anyway, I found this weird folder called Mitchell Project. It was full of files and scans and stuff. Sophie's voice trembled. Grandma, they've been planning this for over a year. Since before the lottery. I found emails. She handed me her phone. On the screen was an email exchange between Richard and someone named Dr. Winters, dated 14 months ago, long before my lottery win. The subject line read, Potential conservatorship case. I read with growing horror. Dr. Winters, thank you for reviewing the materials I sent regarding my mother-in-law, Eleanor Mitchell, 65. As discussed, we are exploring options for assuming control of her affairs as she ages. Your assessment that the documented episode of postpartum psychosis, 1987, alone is insufficient grounds for conservatorship is noted. However, I believe the additional patterns of isolation, paranoia, and financial instability I've outlined strengthen our case. Can you suggest any other avenues we might pursue? As mentioned, speed is not essential, but thoroughness is. We want to be fully prepared when the time comes. Regards, Richard Cantwell. The response was equally chilling. Mr. Cantwell, based on the materials provided, I still find the case for conservatorship extremely weak. Mrs. Mitchell appears to have a documented history of sound decision-making, maintains her own household successfully, and has no recent medical or psychiatric issues that would suggest incapacity. Your observations of paranoia and isolation appear subjective and are contradicted by statements from her neighbors and medical providers. As for financial instability, living modestly on a pension is not evidence of mismanagement. I cannot in good conscience support this action without substantially stronger evidence of genuine incapacity. I would recommend you reconsider this approach.
Dr. Alan Winters.
Geriatric psychiatry. I looked up from the phone, my hands shaking. They were planning to take control of me even before the lottery?
But why?
I had nothing worth taking. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. There's more. I found journal entries Dad kept. He's been obsessed with getting Mom's inheritance. For years. What inheritance? Frank and I never had much money. The house, the pension, a small life insurance policy, that's all. Not money, Sophie whispered. Something else. Something about a key and a storage unit. Dad wrote that you were the only one who knew where it was, but you'd never tell. A cold feeling washed over me.
The key.
My God, they were after the key. Grandma? Sophie's voice seemed to come from far away. What does it mean? What key? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Before your grandfather died, he asked me to keep something safe. A key to a storage unit. He was protecting something. Something from before we were married. What was it? I don't know, I said honestly. He never told me. Just made me promise to keep the key hidden and never tell Melissa about it. He said it would only bring her pain. Sophie frowned. And you never looked? Never checked what was in the storage unit? I promised him, I said simply. And after he died, it seemed even more important to honor that promise. But Dad's been searching for it.
For years, according to these notes.
He thinks it's valuable, whatever's in that storage unit. A terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. Frank's secrecy. His insistence that Melissa never know. The mysterious past he rarely discussed. And now Richard's obsession, spanning years. Where is the key now? Sophie asked.
Hidden, I said.
Somewhere only I know. Sophie nodded slowly. And that's why they needed to control you. To make you tell them. It seems that way. I reached for her hand. Sophie, I'm so sorry. I had no idea any of this was happening. No idea they were plotting against me for so long. She squeezed my hand. It's not your fault. It's theirs. Her young face hardened with resolve. We should tell the police about this. And Diana. She was right, of course. This changed everything. The lottery hadn't created Melissa and Richard's greed. It had merely accelerated a plan already in motion. They had been preparing to take control of me, to force me to reveal the key's location, for over a year. But why now, after all this time? Frank had been gone for 12 years. What had triggered this sudden urgency? The answer came like a bolt of lightning. 10 years. 10 years since Melissa had cut me off. 10 years almost to the day. The statute of limitations for most major crimes in our state was 10 years. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I need to make some calls. Right now. Sophie looked alarmed. What is it? What's wrong? Maybe nothing, I said, already dialing Diana's number. But I think I might know what your grandfather was hiding. And why your parents have suddenly become so desperate to find it. Diana answered on the second ring. Eleanor? Is everything all right? I need to access a storage unit, I said without preamble. One that's been locked for 12 years. And I need the police there when I do. There was a pause. I think you'd better explain. I did, laying out everything. Frank's mysterious key, his deathbed insistence that Melissa never know, the timing of Melissa's estrangement, and now Richard's long-term plan to gain control of me. You think there's evidence of a crime in this storage unit? Diana asked. Something your husband was involved in? Not Frank, I said firmly. Never Frank.
But he knew something.
Something he was protecting Melissa from. And, if I'm right about the timing, the statute of limitations, Diana finished. Yes, I see it now. Let me call Detective Morris. We'll need to do this carefully, properly documented. 3 hours later, I stood outside a nondescript storage facility on the outskirts of town, the key clutched in my hand. Detective Morris stood beside me, along with Diana and 2 uniformed officers. Sophie had begged to come, but I had insisted she stay home with Ethan and the security team. Some revelations were too painful for children to witness. The key slid into the lock smoothly, despite years of disuse. The padlock clicked open, and Detective Morris stepped forward to raise the metal door. The space inside was small and dimly lit. At first glance, it contained nothing remarkable, just a few boxes, a filing cabinet, and an old trunk. But appearances could be deceiving. "Mrs. Mitchell, please wait here while we examine the contents," Detective Morris said gently. "In case there's evidence we need to preserve." I nodded numbly, watching as the officers methodically began documenting and opening each container. Diana stood beside me, her presence reassuring as the minutes ticked by. Finally, Detective Morris emerged, his face grave. In his gloved hands was a file folder. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly, "I think we've found what your husband was protecting your daughter from, and why your son-in-law has been so desperate to find it." He handed me the folder. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and a handwritten confession, all documenting a hit-and-run accident that had killed a young mother 12 years ago. The driver had fled the scene. The car belonged to a high-end financial firm. The driver, according to the confession written in neat, precise handwriting, was Richard Cantwell. And the witness who had recognized him, who had gathered the evidence but ultimately decided to protect his daughter's family rather than seek justice, was my husband Frank. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Frank had known. All this time, he had known that Richard was responsible for a woman's death. And he had chosen to hide the evidence, to protect Melissa and her children from the fallout of Richard's crime. But he had kept the evidence safe, just in case. The statute of limitations for vehicular manslaughter is 10 years in our state, Detective Morris confirmed. It expired last month. That's why they became so aggressive recently. They thought they were finally safe from prosecution. But they're not, Diana said, her legal mind immediately grasping the implications. Because he took active steps to hide evidence and flee jurisdiction. That tolls the statute. And there could be federal charges as well. I stared at the confession in my hands, the last message from my husband, explaining why he had made the choice he had. How he had confronted Richard privately. How Richard had begged for mercy, had promised to turn his life around, to be a better man. Frank had given him that chance, for Melissa's sake, for Sophie and Ethan's sake. And Richard had squandered it, becoming not a better man but a worse one. Controlling, manipulative, greedy. What happens now? I asked Detective Morris. Now we find them, he said grimly. This changes everything. This isn't just about custody or money anymore. This is about justice for a woman who's been dead for 12 years, whose family never got closure. As we drove back to my house, Diana beside me and a police escort following, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. The mystery of Melissa's estrangement finally made sense. Richard must have realized Frank had evidence against him, must have feared I knew about it too. Cutting me off had been self-preservation, not merely cruelty. But what kind of hold did Richard have over my daughter that she would choose him over her own children? That she would flee with him rather than stay with Sophie and Ethan? The answer was waiting at my house, in the form of a familiar black Mercedes parked across the street. Melissa had come home. My heart nearly stopped at the sight of that car, sleek, expensive, and unmistakably Melissa's. For a moment, panic seized me. Were my grandchildren safe? Had Richard returned with her? Detective Morris noticed it too. Stay in the car, Mrs. Mitchell, he ordered, immediately radioing for backup. Within seconds, the quiet street erupted with activity. Police officers approaching the Mercedes, others surrounding my house. But there was only one person in the car, my daughter. And when the officers escorted her from the vehicle, she came without resistance. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She looked nothing like the polished, cold woman who had demanded my money or the furious one who had stormed out of the courtroom. She looked broken. From the safety of Diana's car, I watched as the officers patted her down and spoke to her. I couldn't hear what was being said, but Melissa's body language told me enough. shoulders slumped, head bowed, the fight gone out of her. Detective Morris approached our car. "She's alone," he reported. "Says she wants to talk to you. Claims she didn't know where Richard went, that she's been driving for days trying to decide what to do." "Do you believe her?" Diana asked skeptically.
Hard to say.
"She seems genuinely distressed. We'll need to take her statement, of course, but..." He glanced at me. "It's your call, Mrs. Mitchell. Do you want to speak with her?" Did I? This woman who had abandoned me for a decade, who had tried to take everything from me, who had walked away from her own children without a backward glance. Did I want to hear anything she had to say? And yet she was still my daughter. The baby I had rocked to sleep, the child whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the teenager whose broken heart I had tried to mend. "Yes," I said finally, "but not alone. And not here. Take her to the station. I'll meet you there." Detective Morris nodded. "We'll process her first, routine questioning about Richard's whereabouts, her knowledge of the hit-and-run evidence. Then you can speak with her if you still want to." I watched as they helped Melissa into a police car. She didn't struggle, didn't argue. She simply went, her movements mechanical, her expression vacant. It was like watching a sleepwalker, not my fiery, determined daughter. "Are you sure about this?" Diana asked as the police car pulled away. "After everything she's done?" "No," I admitted. "But I need to try. For Sophie and Ethan, if nothing else." When we reached my house, we found the security team had everything under control. Sophie and Ethan were safe, though shaken by the sudden police activity and the sight of their mother being taken away in a squad car. "Is Mom being arrested?" Sophie asked, her voice small. "No, honey. They just need to ask her some questions." I hesitated, then added, "About your father. Did you find something in the storage unit?" Ethan asked. Sophie had obviously filled him in on our discovery. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "Yes. Evidence that your father was involved in a serious incident many years ago. Something your grandfather knew about." "What kind of incident?" Sophie pressed. I exchanged glances with Diana, who gave a slight nod. These children had been lied to enough. "A car accident," I said gently. "A hit and run. Someone was killed." Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan went pale. "Dad killed someone," he whispered. "The evidence suggests he was driving the car that hit a woman 12 years ago." I confirmed. "Your grandfather witnessed it, recognized your father, and gathered evidence. But instead of going to the police immediately, he confronted your father privately. Why wouldn't Grandpa go to the police?" Ethan asked, confusion and horror battling in his young face. "To protect your mother. And you. You were just small children then." I sighed. "He made a choice, maybe not the right one, but one he thought would keep your family together. He kept the evidence in case your father ever..." I trailed off. "In case he ever did something else bad," Sophie finished softly. "And now he has." I nodded, my heart aching for these children whose world was crumbling around them. "Your mother has come back. She's at the police station now. I'm going to talk to her." "Can we come?" Ethan asked immediately. "Not yet," I said. "Let me speak with her first. Find out what's happening, why she came back. Then we'll see." They didn't like it, but they understood. After making sure they would be safe with the security team, Diana and I headed to the police station where Melissa was being held. Detective Morris met us in the lobby. She's in interview room 2. We've questioned her about Richard's whereabouts, but she claims they separated 3 days ago. Says he became increasingly paranoid, talking about fleeing the country. When she refused to go with him, he left her at a motel in Nevada with minimal cash and her car keys. "Do you believe her?" I asked. He shrugged. "Her credit card was used at a motel outside Reno 3 days ago. Just once, for a single night. The timing matches her story. As for the rest..." He spread his hands. "She's either telling the truth or she's an exceptional actress. She did grow up watching soap operas with me," I said wryly. Detective Morris smiled slightly. "She's not under arrest. She came in voluntarily and has been cooperative. We've advised her of her right to an attorney, but she's declined so far." "Can I see her now?" He nodded. She's asked for you repeatedly. I should warn you, though, she's in rough shape. Whatever's happened over the past week has taken a toll. He led us to an interview room with a large window. Through it, I could see Melissa sitting alone at a metal table, staring at her hands. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights. I'll be right here, Diana assured me as I prepared to enter. If at any point you want to stop, just say the word. I nodded gratefully and opened the door. Melissa's head snapped up at the sound. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Relief? Fear? I couldn't tell. Mom, she said, her voice hoarse. That one word, spoken not with hostility or demand but with something like desperation, nearly broke me. I steeled myself, taking the seat across from her. Melissa, I said evenly. You came back. She nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. Richard's gone. Really gone. He took everything, the emergency cash, our passports, even my credit cards. Left me with just enough to get home.
Why?
I asked. Why would he abandon you? Her laugh was hollow. Because I finally stood up to him. After all these years, I finally said no. When he found out you'd gone to the storage unit, he completely lost it. Said we had to leave the country immediately. I told him I wouldn't leave the kids. Her voice broke. I told him I was done running. That's when he hit me. For the first time, I noticed the fading bruise at her temple, partially hidden by her hair. Maternal instinct flared, a fierce protective rage that surprised me with its intensity. He hit you, I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. Has he done that before? Melissa shook her head. Not like that. He's grabbed me, pushed me, broken things around me. But this was different. I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Something empty. She shuddered. I knew then that I didn't know him at all. Maybe I never had. The hit and run, I said. Did you know? Her eyes filled with tears. Not at first. Richard told me later, after Dad died. Said Dad had threatened to expose him if he ever hurt me or the kids. Said that's why we needed to cut you off completely, in case Dad had told you too. Frank never told me, I said quietly. He kept that secret, even from me, but he kept the evidence safe. Melissa wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. I should have known Dad would have a backup plan. He was always so careful, so strategic. She hesitated. When Richard told me what he'd done, I convinced myself it was an accident, that he'd panicked, that anyone might have done the same thing. You protected him. I was afraid, she whispered. By then, I'd seen what he was capable of when angry. And the kids were so young. I told myself I was keeping our family together, just like Dad had tried to do. I studied my daughter's face, this woman I had once known better than anyone in the world, who had become a stranger to me. And the conservatorship attempt? The threats? Was that fear too? She looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. That was complicated. Richard had been obsessed with finding Dad's evidence for years. When you won the lottery, he saw it as the perfect opportunity. He said if we could get control of you legally, we could search your house, your safe deposit boxes, everything. And you went along with it, I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. You were willing to have me declared incompetent, to strip me of my basic rights, just to protect him. I'm not proud of it, she said, her voice barely audible. I've not been proud of a lot of things for a long time. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of mistakes and misunderstandings between us. The children, she said finally, looking up. Are they okay? They're safe. Confused. Hurt. But safe. She nodded, fresh tears spilling. That's good. That's the most important thing. She took a shaky breath. I don't deserve them. I know that. The way I left them at the courthouse. I'll never forgive myself for that. Why did you do it? Asked, the question that had haunted me. How could you walk away from them like that? Because I'm a coward, she said simply. Because Richard was raging, and I was afraid of what would happen if I defied him in that moment. Because I've spent so many years letting him make the decisions that I didn't know how to stand up for myself or for them. She met my eyes directly. I have no excuses, Mom. Only regrets. The raw honesty in her voice pierced me. This wasn't the entitled, manipulative woman who had demanded my lottery winnings. This was someone else, or perhaps the person who had been buried beneath years of control and fear. What do you want now, Melissa? I asked carefully. Why did you come back? To make things right. As much as I can. She straightened her shoulders slightly. I'm going to tell the police everything I know about Richard, about the hidden run, about his business dealings, all of it. And then, she faltered. Then I want to see my children.
To apologize.
To try to explain, even though there's no explanation that could ever be enough. And after that, she shook her head. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. For the first time in 20 years, I'm making my own decisions. It's terrifying. Despite everything, I felt a glimmer of something like pride. My daughter had lived under Richard's control for half her life. Breaking free, even now, even like this, took courage. The children want to see you, I said. They have questions. Hard ones. I know. I'll answer them honestly. They deserve that much. She hesitated. Will you be there? When I talk to them, the request surprised me. If you want me to be. I do, she said softly. I've missed you, Mom. More than I let myself admit. The words I had longed to hear for a decade. But were they genuine or just another manipulation? The cynical part of me, the part that had been hardened by years of rejection and recent betrayal, couldn't help but wonder. As if reading my thoughts, Melissa added, I know you have no reason to trust me. No reason to give me another chance. I wouldn't, in your position. What would you do in my position? I asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question seriously. I'd protect Sophie and Ethan. I'd make sure they were safe and loved. And She swallowed hard. I'd probably tell me to prove myself with actions, not words. Words are easy. I've always been good with words. Too good, maybe. It was such a frank self-assessment that I was momentarily taken aback. The Melissa I had known these past weeks, arrogant, entitled, cold, would never have spoken with such humility. I'll arrange for you to see the children, I said finally. At my house, with me present. After that, we'll see. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. As I stood to leave, she reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of touching mine. Mom, for what it's worth, I am sorry. For all of it. The cruel things I said. The years we lost. Everything. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw beneath the exhaustion and fear and shame to the daughter I had raised. She was still in there, somewhere. I know, I said simply. The reunion between Melissa and her children was painful to witness. Sophie and Ethan, initially stiff and guarded, gradually broke down as their mother apologized through tears, explaining as gently as possible about Richard's crime, his control, her own weakness and mistakes. There were no excuses, no attempts to justify what couldn't be justified. Just raw, honest accountability. I failed you, she told them, her voice breaking. As a mother, my job was to protect you, to put you first. I didn't do that. I let fear control me instead of standing up for what was right. Sophie, who had been the angrier of the two, asked the hardest questions. Did you ever really love us? Or were we just props for your perfect family act? The question visibly shattered Melissa. I have always loved you. Both of you. More than anything in this world. That's the truth, Sophie. The one thing that has never, ever changed. Then why did you choose him? Ethan asked, his young voice cracking. When we needed you at the courthouse, why did you walk away? Melissa didn't flinch from the question. Because I was afraid. Not of your father, exactly, but of what my life would be without him. He's controlled everything for so long, our money, our decisions, our social circle. The thought of standing on my own terrified me. She took a shaky breath. It's not an excuse. Just the truth. I chose what felt safer in that moment, not what was right. And I will regret that choice for the rest of my life. Gradually, over the course of 2 painful hours, some of the tension in the room eased. Not forgiveness. It was far too soon for that, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. When Melissa finally left, escorted by Diana to a hotel where she would stay while cooperating with the police investigation, Sophie and Ethan seemed both drained and somehow lighter. "Do you believe her?" Sophie asked me later that evening as we sat in the kitchen, picking at a dinner none of us had much appetite for. That she's really sorry? That she's changed? I considered the question carefully. I believe she's sincere right now. Whether that sincerity lasts, whether she's truly changed for good, that we'll have to wait and see. People can change, Sophie, but it takes time and real effort. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. "With the custody stuff? With Dad on the run?" These were the practical questions that still hung over us. Richard remained at large, though a nationwide warrant had been issued for his arrest. The hit-and-run investigation had been reopened, and our court date for the conservatorship and custody hearing was still scheduled for the following week. "We take it one day at a time," I told him. "The police will find your father eventually. As for custody..." I hesitated. "That's partly up to you. Both of you. The judge will want to know what you want." They exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. "We want to stay with you," Sophie said firmly. "Maybe Mom can visit if she's really trying to be better. But we want to live here." The fierce protectiveness I felt toward these children, my grandchildren, Frank's grandchildren, surged within me. Then that's what we'll fight for. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Diana and her team built an ironclad case for permanent custody. Melissa, true to her word, cooperated fully, even signing a formal statement supporting my custody application while requesting supervised visitation rights for herself. "It's the right thing," she told me during one of our cautious, fragile conversations. "The kids need stability. They need someone they can trust completely. That's you, not me. Not yet, anyway." I studied her face, searching for signs of the manipulation I'd grown to expect. But I saw only resignation and a quiet determination. "You're their mother, Melissa. That still means something." She shook her head. "I gave up the right to that title when I walked away from them in that courtroom. I have to earn it back if I even can." This new humility from my daughter was still startling. In the old days, Melissa had never admitted fault, never acknowledged weakness. Richard's hold over her had been more complete than I'd realized, shaping her into a reflection of his own ruthlessness. "People can change," I said, echoing what I'd told Sophie, "if they want it badly enough." "I'm trying," she said simply. "For the first time in a long time, I'm really trying." As the court date approached, there was still no sign of Richard. The police had traced him to Mexico briefly, then lost his trail. His bank accounts had been frozen, his passport flagged, but he had resources, hidden accounts, false identities perhaps. A man who could cover up a fatal hit-and-run for 12 years knew how to disappear. Part of me hoped he would never be found, that he would live out his days in some foreign country, looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows. It seemed a fitting punishment for all the pain he had caused. But another part of me, the part that remembered the woman who had died, whose family had never seen justice, hoped he would be caught.
Tried.
Held accountable for the life he had taken and the lives he had damaged. The morning of the court hearing dawned clear and bright, a beautiful autumn day that belied the tension we all felt. Sophie and Ethan were somber as they dressed in the new clothes we had bought for the occasion, Sophie in a modest navy dress, Ethan in khakis and a button-down shirt. They looked older somehow, as if the past weeks had aged them beyond their years. Melissa would meet us at the courthouse. She had respected our boundaries meticulously, never coming to the house uninvited, always leaving when asked, participating in the legal process with a cooperation that impressed even Diana. "She's either genuinely remorseful or playing an extremely long game," Diana had commented. I believed it was the former. The mask had cracked, revealing the wounded, fearful woman beneath the polished exterior. The question was whether that woman had the strength to rebuild herself into someone better, someone worthy of her children's trust. We arrived at the courthouse to find a media circus. Despite Diana's best efforts, our story had captured the public's imagination. Lottery winner, estranged daughter, attempted conservatorship, fugitive son-in-law, hidden-run cold case. It had all the elements of a sensational drama. Ignore them, Diana instructed as we made our way through a gauntlet of reporters shouting questions. Eyes forward, no comments. Inside, we found Melissa already seated in the courtroom, dressed simply in a gray suit with minimal makeup and jewelry. Gone were the designer labels and flashy accessories. She looked like what she was, a woman fighting for a second chance. She smiled tentatively at Sophie and Ethan, who returned small, awkward smiles of their own. Progress, however slight, was still progress. Judge Watkins entered, and the proceedings began with the formal dismissal of the conservatorship petition. As expected, Melissa's attorney, a new one, not the aggressive Mr. Taylor, offered no objection. That battle was over. The custody matter was more complex. Diana presented our case methodically. The stable home I provided, the children's expressed wishes, my financial resources, the psychological evaluations showing the children thriving in my care. Melissa's attorney then presented her position, acknowledging her past mistakes, requesting supervised visitation, submitting to whatever conditions the court deemed appropriate. Judge Watkins listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When both sides had finished, he called Sophie and Ethan forward to speak with him privately in his chambers. They went bravely, shoulders straight, determined to have their voices heard. While they were gone, Melissa leaned across the aisle toward me. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "thank you for taking care of them, for being what I couldn't be." Before I could respond, the courtroom doors burst open with a bang. Richard Cantwell stood in the doorway, disheveled and wild-eyed, his once immaculate appearance reduced to wrinkled clothes and several days' growth of beard. But most shocking of all was the gun in his hand. "Nobody move," he shouted, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent courtroom. "Where are my children?" Security officers reached for their weapons, but Richard waved the gun erratically. "Don't. I'll shoot. I swear to God I'll shoot." My heart stopped. Sophie and Ethan were safely in the judge's chambers. But for how long? What if they came back while Richard was here? Melissa had gone deathly pale. "Richard," she said, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing?" His eyes found her, blazing with a manic intensity. "Fixing things. Like I always do. Like I've always had to do because you're too weak." He stalked forward, the gun now trained directly on Melissa. The security officers had frozen, clearly waiting for an opportunity that wouldn't endanger the courtroom full of people. "You betrayed me," Richard snarled at Melissa. "After everything I did for you, everything I gave you, you threw it all away and ran back to Mommy." "Richard, please," Melissa pleaded, her voice shaking. "Put the gun down. This isn't helping anything." "Helping?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It's too late for helping. They know about the accident. They've frozen our accounts. They've taken my children. What exactly is left to help?" His gaze shifted, landing on me with such hatred that I physically recoiled. "This is all your fault," he said, the gun now swinging in my direction. "If you had just given us the money like a normal person, if you had just told us where that key was, none of this had to happen." I found my voice somehow, steady despite my terror. "Richard, Sophie and Ethan are going to walk through that door any minute. Do you want them to see you like this? With a gun? Threatening their grandmother? Their mother?" Something flickered in his eyes, a moment of doubt, perhaps even shame. But it was quickly consumed by the rage that seemed to be driving him. "They need to see the truth," he spat. "That I'm the only one who's ever protected them. That I'm the one who built everything we had. While he jabbed the gun toward Melissa, was nothing but a prop. Pretty arm candy from a good family. Useless for anything else." Melissa flinched, as if physically struck. I could see decades of emotional abuse crystallized in that single moment. The cruel words, the belittling, the systematic destruction of her self-worth. But then something remarkable happened. Melissa stood up. "No," she said, her voice stronger now. "That's not true. It never was." Richard blinked, momentarily thrown by her defiance.
Sit down, Melissa.
"Don't be stupid." "I've been stupid for 20 years, she replied. "Stupid to believe your lies. Stupid to let you control me. Stupid to choose you over my children." She took a step toward him. "But I'm not stupid anymore." I said, "Sit down," Richard shouted, the gun shaking in his hand. But Melissa kept moving forward, one slow step at a time. "You can't control me anymore, Richard. You can't control any of us. It's over." I watched in horror and awe as my daughter, my Melissa, walked deliberately toward the man who had dominated her adult life. Toward the gun that could end her life in an instant. "Melissa, don't," I pleaded. She didn't look back. "It's okay, Mom," she said with eerie calm. "He won't shoot me. He needs me too much. I'm his favorite possession." Richard's face contorted with rage. "Stop walking." "I swear to God, Melissa, I'll shoot." "No, you won't," she said, now just feet away from him. "Because without me, you have nothing. No status. No respectable front for your dirty business. No one to blame when things go wrong." She was directly in front of him now, the gun pressed against her chest. The courtroom held its collective breath. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as my daughter stared death in the face. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Pull the trigger. Show everyone who you really are." Time seemed suspended in that moment. Melissa's quiet defiance, Richard's trembling fury, the hushed horror of the courtroom. I saw movement at the edges of my vision, security officers slowly repositioning, preparing to act. And then, from the side door that led to the judge's chambers, came a young voice, strong and clear.
"Dad."
"Stop." Richard's head whipped around. Sophie stood in the doorway, Ethan half hidden behind her, both their faces pale with shock. "Sophie," Richard whispered, the gun lowering slightly.
"Ethan."
"You need to come with me now. We have to go." "No, Dad," Sophie said, her voice remarkably steady. "We're not going anywhere with you." "You don't understand," Richard insisted, desperation replacing some of the rage. "They're lying to you. All of them. Everything I did for us. For our family." "You killed someone," Ethan said, stepping out from behind his sister. "You ran away and left her to die. Was that for our family too?" Richard seemed to physically shrink before our eyes. "It was an accident," he said, his voice smaller now. "I panicked. I made a mistake." "And then you spent 12 years hiding it," Sophie continued. "You made Mom cut off Grandma. You made us believe Grandma didn't want us. You tried to steal her money. You hit Mom when she wouldn't run away with you." She shook her head. "Those weren't accidents, Dad. Those were choices." The brutal clarity of a child's moral judgment. I saw it hit Richard like physical blows, each truth striking deeper than the last. "I can explain," he began, but Ethan cut him off. "We don't want your explanations. We want you to put down the gun." The courtroom remained frozen, everyone aware that the most effective hostage negotiators in this moment were two teenagers facing their father's breakdown with extraordinary courage. Richard looked from his children to Melissa, who still stood directly in front of him, and finally to me. I saw something crumble in his eyes, not just defeat, but recognition. Recognition that he had lost everything that mattered. The gun lowered to his side. In an instant, security officers swarmed him. The gun clattered to the floor. Richard didn't resist as they forced him to his knees, handcuffed him, led him away. He looked back once, not at Melissa or me, but at his children. They didn't look away, didn't run to him, didn't cry. They simply watched, their young faces solemn with a wisdom no child should have to possess. The courtroom erupted in chaos once Richard was gone. People standing, voices raised, court officers restoring order. But in the center of the storm, Melissa stood motionless, as if unable to believe she was still alive. I went to her, wrapping my arms around her without thought or hesitation. She collapsed against me, her body shaking with silent sobs. "I've got you," I whispered, holding my daughter for the first time in a decade. "I've got you." Sophie and Ethan joined us, forming a tight circle in the middle of the courtroom. Grandmother, mother, children. Connected again, however imperfectly, however tentatively. Family. The next few months unfolded with a surreal mixture of public drama and private healing. Richard's arrest made national headlines. The reopened hit-and-run case, the courtroom confrontation, the lottery millions, it was irresistible to the media. Diana fended off interview requests, book deals, movie rights. "Focus on rebuilding," she advised. "The spotlight will move on eventually." Richard's legal troubles mounted by the day. The vehicular manslaughter charge was just the beginning. Financial crimes, witness intimidation, courtroom violence, violating restraining orders. The list grew as investigators dug deeper into his affairs. In a twist that would have seemed melodramatic in fiction, the woman he had killed 12 years ago was the sister of a federal prosecutor. Her family had never stopped searching for justice, never believed the case was truly cold. When they learned the truth, their gratitude toward Frank for preserving the evidence and toward me for bringing it to light was overwhelming. "Your husband did what he thought was right at the time," the prosecutor told me during a private meeting. "Protecting his daughter and grandchildren. I understand that instinct, even if I wish he'd made a different choice." "Frank always believed in second chances," I said. "But he also believed in consequences. That's why he kept the evidence safe." As for our own family, Judge Watkins's ruling came as no surprise after the courtroom incident. I received permanent custody of Sophie and Ethan, with Melissa granted regular visitation, supervised at first, with the possibility of revision as time passed and trust was rebuilt. Melissa found a small apartment nearby, got a job as an administrative assistant in a local business, and began therapy. She attended every visitation faithfully, never missed a school event, and slowly, cautiously began rebuilding relationships with her children. "It's strange," she told me during one of our increasingly comfortable conversations. "I have less now than I've had since college. Less money, less status, less everything. But I feel more like myself than I have in 20 years. "Who is that self?" I asked, genuinely curious. "The real Melissa, without Richard's influence?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "I'm still figuring that out. But I know she's stronger than I thought. More honest. Less concerned with appearances." She smiled faintly. "More like you, maybe." "God help us all," I joked, and we shared a laugh, a small miracle in itself. Sophie and Ethan thrived under the strange new stability we had created. They enrolled in their schools, made friends, joined activities. Sophie discovered a passion for photography. Ethan revealed a talent for computer programming. They spoke with Melissa regularly, visited her on scheduled days, and gradually, so gradually, the tension in those visits began to ease. And me? I adjusted to my unexpected new role as primary caregiver to 2 teenagers. It wasn't easy. I was decades removed from the daily challenges of raising children. But there was joy in it too, in watching them grow, in being needed, in creating the family connections that had been denied them for so long. The lottery money, which had seemed like such a curse at times, now served its proper purpose. It provided security for all of us. It funded the children's education. It supported Melissa as she rebuilt her life. And yes, it continued to flow into the charitable foundation I had established, helping others who had been discarded, forgotten, or abused. 6 months after Richard's arrest, on a crisp spring morning, I stood in my backyard with Sophie, planting marigolds and zinnias, just as we had done when she was a little girl. "Orange ones," she insisted, pressing the seeds into the freshly turned soil. "Lots of orange ones." "Your favorite," I said, smiling. She nodded, her hands busy with the earth. "Grandma, do you think Mom will ever be okay? Really okay?" I considered the question, giving it the seriousness it deserved. "I think she's getting there. Healing takes time, Sophie. And your mother has a lot to heal from." "Because of Dad?" "Partly," I acknowledged. "But also because of choices she made, patterns she fell into, Those are harder to change than we like to admit. Sophie sat back on her heels, looking thoughtful. I'm still angry sometimes. At both of them. Is that bad?
No, sweetheart.
It's honest. Anger is part of healing too. She returned to her planting, quiet for a moment. I'm glad you won the lottery, she said finally. Not because of the money, because it brought us back to you. My heart swelled. Me too, Sophie. More than you can ever know. Later that afternoon, Melissa came for her regular visit. I watched from the kitchen window as she joined Sophie in the garden, awkwardly at first, then with increasing confidence as Sophie showed her what they had planted. Orange marigolds, seeds of healing, hope for something new to grow from the wreckage of the past. That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, surrounded by the comfortable noise of teenagers doing homework, music playing softly from somewhere upstairs. My house, once so empty and quiet, now pulsed with life. On the mantel stood a photograph I had recently framed, Sophie, Ethan, Melissa, and me, taken during a carefully orchestrated family dinner the previous week. Our smiles were tentative but real. A new beginning. Beside it was an older photo, Frank holding baby Melissa, his face alight with the particular joy of a new father. I touched it gently. We made it, Frank, I whispered. Not the way we planned, not the way we hoped, but we made it. The lottery ticket that had changed everything, that $5 impulse buy at Harvey's gas station, had brought both disaster and redemption. It had exposed the worst in some people and the best in others. It had torn apart and, improbably, begun to heal a family broken long before the winning numbers were drawn. Money, I had learned, couldn't buy happiness. But sometimes, if you were very lucky, it bought the truth. And the truth, however painful, was the only foundation on which anything real could be built. As for Richard, he would spend the next decade, at minimum, in prison. The man who had lived by control would now have every aspect of his life controlled by others. There was a certain justice in that symmetry. Melissa would continue her slow journey of recovery and redemption, learning to be not just a mother but a person in her own right, something Richard had never allowed her to be. Sophie and Ethan would grow up with scars, yes, but also with strength and understanding beyond their years. And with love, imperfect, complicated love from both their mother and their grandmother. And me? I had found something I thought was lost forever. Family. Not the fantasy version I had longed for during those lonely years, but the real thing, messy, difficult, resilient.
True.
The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Denise from Harvey's gas station, the young woman with pink hair who had sold me the winning ticket. Mrs. M. I haven't talked to you in ages. Just checking in to see how things are going. I saw that creep husband of your daughter got sentenced yesterday. Good riddance, right?
I smilte her foråretsmænd.
Good riddance indeed, Denise. And things are improving. Slowly, but surely. That's great. Hey, we've got another big jackpot this week. Want to try your luck again? I laughed, looking around at my once empty house now filled with teenagers and second chances. No thank you, Denise. I think I've had all the luck I can handle for one lifetime. When my estranged daughter told me to hurry up and die so she could have my lottery winnings, I never imagined it would lead to saving her life. But as I look at my family now, broken, healing, real, I realize that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. And that, perhaps, is the greatest fortune of all.